Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The night stretches endless, and the highway hums like a heartbeat in the dark. Welcome to the sleep haunt, where fear rides shotgun and every mile hides a secret. Tonight, we bring you 8 true creepiest trucker horror stories, tales whispered through CB radios, lonely rest stops, and stretches of road where reality starts to unravel. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Hit that like button now and help us keep the wheels turning through the shadows. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. He had driven this stretch 100 times and could have charted it in his sleep. But on that night, the prairie felt newly made. The sky was a bowl of ink. The stars were distant and few. Dalton kept the rig steady, fingers relaxed on the wheel, breath slow. In the periphery of the sleeper berth, his thermos ticked against its cap, marking time more faithfully than his weary mind. The trailer behind him tugged with its honest weight. Nothing exotic, just rolls of paper bound for a printing plant 3 states east. He liked the simple way the planes kept their secrets. Towns here were little collections of sodium lights, a few clustered trees bent by wind, a grain elevator rising like a lighthouse. Tonight, even the towns seemed to have dimmed. The CB was a low hush. His phone lay face down. The dash clock held its blue numbers steady, but time, like the road, stretched thin and strange. Around mile marker 211, something small tapped the glass. Not a stone, not an insect. Just a sound like a finger gently testing the window. Dalton glanced out. The shoulder was a ribbon of darkness, brush flattened by years of wake. He shook his head and leaned forward toward the windshield, the way a driver does when trying to nudge the headlights farther. A sign crept into view. Exit 4. Fuel Diner Motel. He'd passed that exit earlier in the day. It shouldn't have been here again. He blinked. The sign was gone, replaced by one that said nothing at all, just a blank green slab awaiting instructions. He laughed under his breath, an easy, empty sound, and reached for the radio. Static. He turned the knob a fraction. A voice came through. A woman reading the weather like a metronome. Light southwesterly winds. Visibility's good. The words were out of time for what the windshield said. The weather was still. The air was heavy, almost sweet, as if the fields had been baking sugar all afternoon and now exhaled it in the dark. Mile marker 210, then 209. Then a sign he'd never seen on this route. Exit 0, Last Oak Rest Area, 1 mile. A silhouette of a spreading tree stood crisp on the reflective panel, the kind of tree the planes rarely made anymore. His map app showed a long, uninterrupted line ahead, no exit, no rest stop. His fuel was fine. His hours were decent, yet his eyes, he noticed, kept returning to the oak on the sign, its branches cut into the night like a paper silhouette. He told himself he would pass it. Curiosity was a dangerous passenger. He had, in the past, seen exits that seemed to move. Construction signs came and went. Closures and detours had minds of their own. Another sign appeared before he could decide. Last Oak Rest Area Services Coffee Safe Parking. He swallowed. Coffee sounded like a promise. The ramp was handsomely paved, clean reflective buttons guiding a smooth curve down and left. The headlights found the shape of a tidy building ahead, low brick, a sloped roof, soft light under the eaves. Beyond it, a lot wide enough to swing any trailer, spaces neatly striped, a few covered picnic tables, a flag at half-staff barely stirring. Dalton slowed, signal blinking like a heartbeat in the mirror. The place was quiet, not empty, just quiet in a way that felt curated. He found a long space and eased in. The brakes sighed. He sat with both hands on the wheel and listened to the engines idle smooth into a purr. Across the lot, a vending machine glowed a friendly blue. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something he wanted to call wood smoke, though there was no smoke, no warmth, just the hint of it. He stepped down from the cab, and boots touched pavement that felt recently washed. Somewhere, a single cricket tried a sentence. thought better of it, and went silent. Inside the building, motion sensors were a half-second slow, as if reluctant to startle. Lights rose to a pleasant brightness. The restrooms were immaculate, the tiles clean in a way that didn't display itself, the air cool, the hum of an unseen fan steady. Near the sinks, a corkboard held an arrangement of safety flyers that looked a season out of date, but not a decade. Share the road. Winter chains. Stay rested. A brochure rack offered maps with a cheerful highway shield in a shade of blue. No one used anymore. There was a machine that sold coffee for $1. He put in coins and watched as it filled a thick paper cup, steam coiling delicately. The taste was almost sweet. On the wall, a small speaker clicked on, and a voice spoke as if continuing a conversation. Welcome to Last Oak. Please secure your vehicle. Please report suspicious activity to the attendant. There was no attendant. There was, however, a tiny office with the blinds drawn. Through a narrow slit in the slats, a desk lamp burned, the circle of its light empty. The voice added, "Have a safe journey," and clicked away. He wandered out into the night, cup warming his hands. His rig loomed familiar in the lamp glow, a carved silhouette in a museum of shadows. He stood beside the hood and looked up. The sky above the lot was different, not clouded, not clear, just a shade of black that felt closer than the black he'd left on the interstate. He walked slowly, tracing the periphery of the lot. A wind moved, light and purposeful, stirring a skitter of dry leaves across the asphalt. He bent and picked one up. An oak, crisp and thin. But the trees beyond the fence were scrub and cottonwood, nothing like this. He set the leaf in the cup holder and climbed back into the cab. The dash clock read 1:11. He was certain it had been later. He didn't remember settling the hands there. He turned the key to on, listened, then started the engine. The radio woke with a whisper of music from a decade-gone warm guitars, a gentle drum. He smiled, rolled his shoulders, and pulled out to circle the lot and head back to the ramp. The sign at the ramp did not say, "To interstate." It said, "Re-entry." The arrow was correct. The word felt off, formal in a way highway language never was. He eased down, expecting the merge. The ramp took him with a coiling grace and applied him to a stretch of asphalt that looked for a moment like everything he'd come to trust. He breathed easier. The headlights brightened, met the reflective stripes, and the world returned. Then the mile markers were wrong. They stood tall and clean, but they bore no numbers he knew. 3 dashes, a 0, a vertical line like a bookmark. The next bore a single dot. The next was blank. He traveled a few moments in that odd company and the radio lost its music. He flicked on his turn signal and changed lanes, as if that could fix it. It didn't. The ramp appeared again. He hadn't taken an off-ramp. He hadn't looped. He was back at re-entry. Dalton pulled into the lot a second time, careful and deliberate. He set the brakes and let the engine idle. He counted slowly to 50, then to 100, with the discipline of someone who knows panic is mostly breath. He sipped his coffee. It was still hot. The oak leaf in the cup holder looked exactly as it had, a small handprint of a tree. He stood again, crossed the lot again, peered into the office again. The light burned. The speaker clicked. "Please secure your vehicle," it said. "Have a safe journey." The second line was exactly timed to when he passed the same tile seam at the same step length. He altered his path. He shortened his stride. The speaker finished its line anyway, a beat after, a script that didn't care for improvisation. He went back out to the truck and pointed his headlights toward a far corner where the brush grew thick. There was a service road there, narrower, gravel chewed by the tires of maintenance crews. A gate stood across it, chain looped, lock shining neat as a badge. A sign read "Authorized vehicles only" in a font that had long since fallen out of favor. Beneath it, a smaller sign. "If closed, use alternate. Follow return guidance." Sound horn twice. He felt silly, but he raised his hand to the center of the wheel and pressed. 2 small bleats, polite in the dark. The gate did not open. The wind answered, bringing with it the clean trace of lemon again. He stood very still and noticed the electric thrum of the building. He noticed his own breath, the way it fogged when he held it too long. The lamp over the picnic tables winked once, and then resumed. He thought of all the rest areas he'd used in all kinds of weather, all times of night. None had ever felt like a room he'd entered with rules he didn't know. He returned to the cab, clicked to parking lights only, and closed his eyes for a measured 10 minutes. He'd learned years ago that 10 minutes could reset a night. He did not sleep. Not exactly. He rested with a dream near at hand. In that dream, maps leaned against one another in an empty hall, their edges whispering like leaves. When he opened his eyes, the clock read 1:11. The coffee was still hot. The air smelled faintly of oak, which meant nothing and bound everything. He turned the key and spoke out loud the words he would have said to any nervous trainee. Easy, steady inputs. You're the captain in here. He decided to ignore the ramp altogether. He eased the rig to the farthest edge of the lot where the curb was low and the grass showed the hint of a worn path. He aimed his front tire for the place where the curb dipped to meet a driveway nobody had made official. The truck climbed, the trailer followed. The suspension whispered as it took the angle. Gravel replaced the clean pavement, crunching under weight. Beyond the brush, a lane presented itself, barely wider than his wheels, reflectors dull with dust. He kept the speed walking slow, the engine a contented murmur. The lane paralleled where the interstate ought to be, though he saw no traffic, no ribbon of white, only the suggestion of it in the way the land settled or rose. He moved like that for a long minute, then another. No music, no chatter, just the sound of his own machine moving through a corridor made of weeds and fence. The reflectors began to brighten, as if someone had wiped them. The gravel smoothed. A sign appeared, plain as daylight. Merge area yield watch for traffic. Beyond it, the normal world unfolded as if it had been there all along. Headlights hummed by, red taillights drifted like embers. The stars relocated themselves to their appointed places. Dalton checked his mirrors, signaled, and merged as the sign had asked. The rig took to the lane, and the lane welcomed it. He made it 3 miles before he looked back. When he did, there was only an unremarkable swale and a stand of brush that could have hidden rabbits but not a building. He exhaled and laughed once, not with bravado, just with the odd relief of rejoining a river after being in a quiet eddy. The radio found itself, offering a different station now, a man with a late-night voice telling a story about a ball game. Dalton drove and listened, and let the words pass through without catching. Dawn arrived light-handed. The east turned a credible gray, and the land regained its edges. He rolled into the printing plant's yard with plenty of time, and back to a dock that had been his before. The scale ticket printed a number. He glanced without interest, handed it over, signed the paper, and only later noticed that his log showed 2 fewer miles on the stretch between 209 and 205 than any other run he'd made. The kind of difference easily explained by traffic, wind, or a math glitch. He filed it under "Not Now" and took his empty trailer into the day. That afternoon, during a wait at a fuel island, he asked a driver in a faded cap about rest areas on the plane. The man shrugged. They closed 1 year back. Liability. Folks said it was clean and easy. Just funny. Like it was too proud of being helpful. Dalton smiled. They didn't trade more. Back home, the oak leaf in the cup holder turned brittle, and then, when he reached to move it, held like it had been placed. He slid it into the dash cubby and did not try to give it meaning. A week later, running the same line in the same night, he watched the mile markers with a new patience. At 211, nothing tapped the glass. At 210, a truck passed with its side markers winking a friendly code. At 209, he turned down the radio to listen for a voice he hadn't heard. He heard only the sweet, empty sort of wind that belongs to late summer. He supposed that the exit was gone. He was not wrong, and not right, and the highway did not argue. He pulled to the shoulder where the land dipped and the fence leaned. He opened the door and let the night breathe into the cab. He waited a minute, then maybe another. The smell of lemon cleaner came and went, light as a memory. He reached for a glove in the compartment, and his fingers met paper instead of folded brochure he hadn't put there. Last Oak, the cover said, the tree drawn in the same sure hand as the sign. Inside was a map with an arrow pointing to an anonymous thumb of land that could have been anywhere in 10 states. In a tidy script, someone had written, "Thank you for stopping. Travel safe." The ink had bled a little at the loops, the way a pen does on older stock. A printed date in the corner belonged to a year when he'd been new to the road. He did not show it around. He kept it tucked behind his registration, where drivers sometimes keep little talismans they don't admit are talismans. Months later, at a terminal coffee counter, a woman told a story to the room, and nobody laughed. "You ever get an exit that isn't there?" she asked. "If you do, don't follow the arrows. Arrows are for people who already know the way. Look for the side lane. It'll treat you right." Several heads nodded like they knew, and one shook like he wished he didn't. And the conversation slipped back to weather and tires. Dalton drove on. He crossed winter and summer in their time. Sometimes, on long nights when the road was extra kind and the company was the sound of his own engine and the patient interior of his mind, he would catch the scent of something clean and domestic in a place where there should be only dust. He would picture a low brick building with a light under the eaves and a door that opened on a click, and he would keep his hands steady on the wheel. He never found Last Oak again like he had, but he didn't need to. The road is a long listener. Sometimes it hears what a driver can't say, that there are moments when a person behind glass and steel would like to be guided. On those nights, where the ribbon narrows and the stars lean in, he would think of a sign with a tree and the word re-entry, and the way a path appears for those who choose to look at the corner instead of the center. The highway is not only concrete and paint, it is habit and hope. It is the place where a man with miles in his eyes can pull over, just once, and be allowed to find his way back without anyone asking his name. Story number 2. Mara rolled out of the yard just after dark, a lowboy under her carrying a transformer the size of a garden shed. The straps lay flat, the chains hummed a patient note, and the paperwork in the binder said what she liked to see. Permits in order, route approved, hours to spare. The river country would be quiet at that hour. 2-lane blacktop laid across low marshes and old towns, then the county bridge and a climb through timber until the interstate gathered her up again. She kept the pace modest, and the engine even, watching the needle sit where it should, grateful for a wind that chose not to argue with wide loads. Her dash threw a soft glow over the cab. A thermos rode shotgun. On the passenger seat, a paper map lay folded, not because she needed it, but because paper maps have a way of making the night feel practical. The CB was on but low, an ear on the world without inviting the world in. There were other trucks, about one behind her for a while, then gone at the climb, another approaching and passing in a long, considerate arc. The stars were as thin as chalk. The river, still out of sight, announced its nearness by the way the air cooled, and by a faint mineral smell that rose from the low flats. Her route called for County Bridge 7, Copper Hollow. She knew it. She'd crossed it last month with a turbine blade and a pilot car paid to make sure she borrowed only the center of the deck. Tonight the permit listed no need for escort. Weight was high, but within tolerance. Traffic would be lean. Come midnight, she'd be over and climbing to the ridge. As she came through Sycamore Bend, the fog rose. It didn't spill so much as lift, like a white curtain coming up slow from the ground. The headlights reached into it and returned tired, smudged. The road narrowed itself without changing width. Fences, ditches, cattails, everything was still where she expected. But the edges of things softened. She eased down a mile an hour, and then another. On the right, the old cannery silhouette turned to a gray cube, then to a memory of angles. The CB picked up a fringe of static. "Evening to the heavy," a voice said gently on 19, a local cadence, vowels easy. "Fog bank at the water. Ridge advisory in effect. Proceed to alternate." She thumbed her mic. "Copy advisory. Which alternate?" "Pilot will meet at mile 42, the voice said. "Follow amber. Keep it steady. Welcome." That last word was strange, not wrong, just a shiny coin in the dust. She looked at the dash clock. 11:09. She didn't remember a notice about the county imposing an advisory, but the fog didn't ask permission. She tapped her permit page with a finger. It listed a number for the DOT office, and she punched it into her phone as she rolled. The call didn't ring or fail. It sat in a quiet, like someone across the line was listening through a wall. At mile 42, an amber bar appeared ahead as promised, blurred but firm, a lantern folded into the fog. The truck bearing it sat at an angle on the shoulder, nose pointed out, not blocking, just waiting. As she approached, it eased out with the unshowy confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. The back window carried a sign in reflective letters. "Follow me." The font was the old kind, the kind you saw on painted wood rather than plastic. In the lower corner, a decal showed a blue shield worn pale by years. She set a comfortable distance and fell in. Behind, they left the regular line at a turnout she wouldn't have noticed if she didn't know what to look for. 2 short posts half swallowed by grass, a cracked apron, a gap in a fence where trucks older than hers had made their own case for an exit. The pilot's amber bar carried through the whiteness with an almost musical rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. The CB whispered again, a different voice this time, thinner and careful, like someone using a script. "Brake check ahead. Deck is damp. Mind the sill." "Copy," she said, out of habit more than need. She set the jake to low, rolled over a shallow dip, and felt the road under her change composition. Asphalt surrendered to a tight, tidy macadam patched so neatly it felt like a quilt. Old road. To the left, the world went open in a way that said water, though she saw only fog. To the right, a line of willow trunks turned to shadows and then to nothing. The pilot car's taillights winked twice, a driver's way of saying, "Watch me here," and then took a right-hand turn that tightened, down, around, into a pocket of dark. The fog changed quality, thicker, heavier, and scented with cold iron. Mara slowed to walking speed and put her hands on the wheel in that old-school way, 10 and 2, as if the night could see her courtesy. A shape formed ahead, a ramp, a lip of steel, chains, a square of black larger than any lane had need to be. The pilot car rolled over and settled on a wide, flat grid and stopped under a lamp that burned in a tone she'd only ever seen in photographs. Sodium, not LED. She lifted her foot and let the rig creep onto the deck, the iron under her echoing in a soft, hollow way. The ramp rose behind her with a sigh like someone closing a window against rain. She set the brakes gently as the cab shivered and then steadied. A distance away, a bell tapped. An old harbor sound, and a faint horn pushed through the white, like a hand through a curtain. She looked in her mirrors and saw nothing but her own lamps. The pilot car in front of her glowed amber, then the bar switched off, as if dimming for a performance. Ahead, beyond the nose of the pickup, fog and a lamp and a small square booth with its window down. A voice arrived from a loudspeaker above the booth, unhurried and shaped by courtesy. "Remain in vehicles," it said. "Clear as a schoolroom. Metal deck. Keep engines at idle. No smoking." The way the words lined up made Mara feel as if she had wandered into a room where the chairs were nailed to the floor. Safe. Neat. Old. "We're on a ferry," she said to the empty cab, and then realized how odd it sounded. The county had retired the river ferry when they built Copper Hollow Bridge. There were photographs in the diner at Stilt House of the last crossing, a day with balloons and a giant pair of scissors. The pilot car's brake lights brightened, then dimmed, as if the driver had set a foot to the pedal by habit. The fog around them leaned against the lamp in sheets. Something pulled in the water below, slow and mammoth. The deck shifted gently. The loudspeaker clicked again. "Cross current present. Secure loose items. Stay with your vehicles until told otherwise." There was no otherwise. The sound of water under iron took on a silky quality. Somewhere unseen, a cable sang a low, liquid note. The deck carried them without fuss. She thought about trying to reach her dispatcher. The bars on her phone climbed to full and then fell to 1 and then to none, like a bird at a window trying to understand glass. The CB had stopped offering chatter and settled into the kind of hiss that makes a driver feel like the only person awake in the world. She tried the pilot car with a polite call on 19. "Lead vehicle. This is the heavy behind you. Appreciate the guidance." Nothing came back. That in itself wasn't strange. Radios slip in fog, but she felt the shape of a response, the way a person can sense a message in the timing of silence. Outside, a soft sound like the tapping of a ring on a railing came and went. Once she thought she heard footsteps paced, careful, the way an old deck asks you to walk. She checked instinctively that her doors were locked, then shook her head at herself. There was no need for fear there. This wasn't danger, not that kind. It was a different strangeness. The past working late. They moved through thickness, then a lessening, then something like a wide breath. Another horn sounded, farther off. The pilot car's amber bar flashed once, a tiny salute, then stayed dark. The loudspeaker woke again, the tone exact to the first. "Prepare to disembark." Drivers remain in vehicles until ramp is aligned. No overtaking. Thank you for sailing. Sailing. It landed on her like a word from a book she hadn't opened in years. The ramp touched with a low metal throat clearing. The pilot car eased forward, the deck under its tires giving a small, tired squeal. Mara let her hand rest on the knob of the shifter a long second as if feeling for any hesitation in the iron, then released the brakes and let the rig creep, the weight of the transformer honest and considerate. The transition from deck to ramp didn't bite. The alignment was perfect. They climbed a small grade cut into a bank, passed under the same old sodium glow, and returned to macadam. The pilot car's amber bar lit again, and they took a road Mara had never known there, a narrow shelf along the river's curve that brought them up to the county lane, as if they'd never left a proper map. A mile later, the fog unknotted itself enough to reveal the green overhead sign she'd expected earlier. Copper Hollow Bridge. Next right. It stood quiet, dutiful, and unnecessary. The pilot car signaled left and guided her onto the ramp to the highway instead, a choice so ordinary it felt like a kindness. At the merge, the pickup blinked its hazards twice, then dismissed itself with a patient wave, and took the next exit without being theatrical about it. She watched the amber bar disappear into soft dark, the way a firefly vanishes into deeper brush. Mara checked her mirrors like a ritual, adjusted the speed to what the interstate wanted, and settled into the slow lane. Her shoulders noticed they had been a little high and lowered themselves by degrees. She drove another hour, and then pulled into a truck stop on the ridge where the coffee tasted like it always tasted, and the pie under the glass dome looked like a small promise. She parked in the quiet row where the long-haul drivers go to be undisturbed and walked inside. On the wall near the booth she chose, a black and white photograph hung in a simple frame. She looked because that is what people do in small hours. They look at other people's captured days. The picture showed a ferry landing on the near side of a fog. Trucks waited on deck in a neat line. Open cabs, rounded fenders, the era when headlights were separate, little lamps like eyes. Under the photo, a brass plate read, Greywater Ferry, 1937-1972, last crossing June 12. On the far side of the booth, another photograph showed the ribbon cutting at Copper Hollow Bridge, the same date. She looked back and forth, from old to new and back again, like someone practicing a language. Back in the cab, she pulled her binder to check her times. She'd entered the fog at 11:21. She'd come out somewhere around midnight. The odometer matched the miles she would have made using the bridge. She smiled, because sometimes the world aligns just because you need it to. She took off her boots, set the thermos down, and tried the DOT number one more time as she settled into the sleeper. This time, the call rang twice, then 4 times, and a recorded message told her in a brisk, modern voice that the office was closed. For advisories, press 1. She didn't press anything. She lay awake, aware in a comfortable way of the hum of other trucks doing what hers was doing. Cooling, creaking, resting. Somewhere above her, a flag tugged a little at its rope. Morning made the ridge honest. Sun filled the gaps in the trees, and the river below lay like a ribbon of metal hammered flat. Mara skipped a second coffee because it felt like a two-water morning, and took the ramp down toward the county road out of a quiet desire to see in daylight what the night had made vague. She didn't plan to cross the bridge again. She'd go as far as the turnoff and rejoin the route her permit knew. Curiosity was not a plan, but it was a companion. At the bend where the pilot car had waited, there was only shoulder and scrub. In full day, the grass was untroubled. Some tire marks showed, but nothing she could call unusual. At the low place where the fog had been its heaviest, she slowed and peered right between willows. There, under the leaning branches, sat 2 concrete blocks with grooves worn smooth, the remains of something that had welcomed weight for decades and then been forgotten. A chain hung between them, rusted but neat, its 2 ends looped as if someone had taken time to arrange it in a kind shape. She eased forward and found a little turnout with a historical marker in green paint, the kind that speaks to school trips and polite Sundays. She set the brake and walked over. The sign told a tidy version. Greywater Ferry served the river here from 1912 until 1972. Retired upon completion of Copper Hollow Bridge. No mention of advisories. No talk of fog. At the bottom, A faded sticker asked visitors not to leave trash. She stood still and let the particular quiet of morning river country sit around her. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, the sound carried nicely by the air. A boat motor buzzed, a distant, mosquito kind of sound. She looked down at her boots and noticed a faint white residue in the laces, a salt line like the kind that forms after rain dries. It made sense. Fog was wet. She wiped it with her thumb, and it vanished. On the next break, at the industrial park where she was due to deliver, she mentioned the advisory to the gate guard while they waited for the bay to clear. He was the sort of man who collected information the way some people collect stones, hands in the pockets, eyes amused by anything unusual. "Bridge advisory?" he said. "Haven't had one of those in a stretch. Fog last night, though. Could hardly see the stripe. You know they used to run a ferry down there." "I've seen the pictures," she said. "Shame you missed it," he said, as if he believed she had. "My granddad swore by that ferry. Said the fellow at the booth could tie a knot with his eyes closed. Said if you rolled up late, he'd hold the deck a minute, but only a minute." He smiled, and his smile contained a little of whatever a person keeps from a story told to them when they were small. On her way back out to the highway after the delivery, she thought to check her dash cam. It had been recording, of course. She queued up footage from the night and let it run while she idled at a light. The video showed what she had seen. Fog, amber, the pilot car's taillights, the suggestion of a ramp, the blue square of a booth, the glow of a sodium lamp. When the ferry horn sounded in memory, the camera captured only a thickening in the gray grain. At the moment of crossing, the footage did something cameras do at the edge of their patience. It smeared light into a gentle blur, like a thumb across chalk. The progress bar at the bottom moved steadily. Time had moved. The scene had stayed much the same. A 7-minute interval contained 4 images, each like a painting of fog. She could have told herself a simple story. The county had a temporary arrangement, an emergency plan old as the roads themselves, and in the confusion of weather and night, they summoned a solution with bolts and chain and habit. That one worked, but it didn't account for a few things it didn't need to account for. The familiar phrasing of the loudspeaker, the way the pilot car's back window held letters from another time, the clean click of the ramp, the grace with which her heavy load had found the angle without lurch or correction. Weeks later, on a different route, she stopped in Stilthouse and walked into the diner with the photographs again. A woman behind the counter had a voice that made coffee sound warmer than it was. When Mara asked about the ferry, the woman tilted her head. "You're talking like you took it," she said, friendly, half teasing. "Felt like it," Mara said. The woman poured and leaned a knuckle on the laminate to think. "Fog does what fog wants," she said. "Sometimes it's like a curtain that's opened. Sometimes like one that's closed. I will say this. When the fog is a certain weight, you'll see lights that aren't there when the sun's up. You keep steady and you're fine. You panic and you get yourself in trouble. Same with the river. Same with most things." Mara smiled and lifted the cup in a small toast. On her way out, she passed the bulletin board with yard sale flyers and lost cat notices and tacked to one corner, almost invisible, a faded slip printed in a style nobody used anymore. Passenger ticket, 1 vehicle, 1 driver. Greywater Ferry Company. The price was a number that made no sense in 2020 anything. Someone had written across it in a fine hand. No change given. It looked more blue than black, the way old ink does. She did not take the paper down. She did not take a picture. She stepped into daylight that was clean and regular and returned to a truck that had a job for her hands to do. The map on the passenger seat folded a little more from the vibrations of the road and made the sound maps make a dry, light whisper, like leaves agreeing with wind. In her rear view, the river straightened and bent as the land asked it to, and the bridge's green arch lifted itself above the trees with the good manners of an object, doing its appointed work. She drove on. Now and then, when a fog rises at odd hours and the highway asks for patience, she watches for an amber pulse in a place it shouldn't be. If one appears, she keeps her pace modest and her hands easy. There are detours that don't go on maps. They arrive when all that's needed is quiet agreement, a willingness to follow without showing off. They do what they came to do, and then they fold back into the weather as if they had always been made of it. She doesn't chase them. She lets them come or not. Some nights the world is content to be ordinary. On others, it offers a crossing no one can schedule. And if you're lucky, you get to be delivered without anyone ever asking your name. Story number 3. Silas took the high desert run because it was the kind of night that made a person feel like the earth had been set to quiet. The sky was a dome of deep blue black, a few stars chipped into it. The moon a thin coin he barely saw in the mirrors. The reefer hummed behind him, steady and courteous. His trailer held boxes of lettuce bound for grocery warehouses on the far side of the plateau. The road, an east-west line too straight to argue with, ran through sage and low hills and long stretches of flat where the horizon sat like a ruler. He settled into that rhythm that comes after hours. Eyes relaxed but alert, hands easy, seat adjusted to that angle that lets a driver float in the space between muscle and intention. The dash gave off a gentle glow. A thermos sat in the cup holder, a piece of home disguised as steel. The stereo offered a low song and then a call-in show, and then nothing but the kind of soft silence that is its own company. He passed the occasional ranch gate. He watched for deer. He checked the wind by the grass's posture. He liked this work because the road never asked for more than a person could give. Around mile 87, he noticed a pair of headlights behind him, distant and careful, the way another rig's lights appear when someone else has joined the same line of night. Nothing to think about. He checked his speed. He was legal, maybe 2 over on the downslope. Feather light on the pedal. He moved a touch right in his lane to let the follower see around him. A polite gesture that anyone with miles knew. The lights stayed where they were, small points far back, steady. He thought of other things. The baby picture his sister had sent that afternoon. The clever face of a kid who had just learned how hands worked. The email from dispatch about construction near the border. A note he'd written himself on a folded piece of paper tucked in the door. Buy new flashlight. Batteries. The road ticked by, and he let it. Then the lights behind him changed. Not closer, not farther. They matched him. When he shed a mile an hour on a grade, they shed it too. When he set the cruise back where it had been, they settled as if on a spring. No big deal. Plenty of drivers travel in quiet company without knowing it. The night puts people in pairs. He flicked his right turn signal once, not to move, just to communicate without saying a word. If you want around, I see you. The lights behind him blinked their hazards twice. A friendly thanks drivers give each other on the plains. He smiled. It felt neighborly. He waited for them to pass. They didn't. He signaled left and slid over to the passing lane for a quarter mile. And then, not seeing anyone ahead for a long stretch, slid back again. The lights echoed the move exactly, the kind of precise echo that made his mind turn a notch. Not uncanny, just tidy in a way that wasn't usual. He touched the brake pedal with the gentleness of a man testing a chair before he sits. The brake lights on his trailer glowed red in the mirrors, small and polite. 3 seconds later, the lights behind him brightened too, the same degree. He tried the test again, counted under his breath, and the timing was the same 3 beats, and then a mirror of his own action. He said nothing out loud. He checked his mirrors again. The desert didn't blink. The road kept its place. He reached for the CB. No chatter on 19. He rolled the squelch a little, the way people do when they want to be sure the silence is real. Westbound? You're welcome to come around, he said, voice low, a touch of smile in it. The speaker offered only the hush of distance. He tried the company channel with nothing more specific in mind than the desire to hear a voice. It came back empty. Cell service winked down to a bar, and then back up. Thin country. He watched the road ahead. In the distance, a green sign lifted on 2 poles. Starling Gorge, 21 miles. The name carried its own kind of quiet. He'd been through the gorge 100 times, a cut through the low mountains where the road pinched itself to 2 lanes, then widened again after a tunnel and a long sag. He thought of the runaway truck ramp there, and the way its gravel looked like a bed someone had combed with a rake. The followers' lights kept their place. He ate the miles and let the truck work. At the mile marker for 98, the wind nudged him, and he adjusted. The lights nudged. Let the particular quiet of morning river country sit around her. Somewhere far off a dog barked, the sound carried nicely by the air. A boat motor buzzed. a distant, mosquito kind of sound. She looked down at her boots and noticed a faint white residue in the laces, a salt line like the kind that forms after rain dries. It made sense. Fog was wet. She wiped it with her thumb, and it vanished. On the next break, at the industrial park where she was due to deliver, she mentioned the advisory to the gate guard while they waited for the bay to clear. He was the sort of man who collected information the way some people collect stones, hands in the pockets, eyes amused by anything unusual. "Bridge advisory?" he said. "Haven't had one of those in a stretch. Fog last night, though. Could hardly see the stripe. You know they used to run a ferry down there." "I've seen the pictures," she said. "Shame you missed it," he said, as if he believed she had. "My granddad swore by that ferry. Said the fellow at the booth could tie a knot with his eyes closed. Said if you rolled up late, he'd hold the deck a minute, but only a minute." He smiled, and his smile contained a little of whatever a person keeps from a story told to them when they were small. On her way back out to the highway after the delivery, she thought to check her dash cam. It had been recording, of course. She queued up footage from the night and let it run while she idled at a light. The video showed what she had seen: fog, amber, the pilot car's taillights, the suggestion of a ramp, the blue square of a booth, the glow of a sodium lamp. When the ferry horn sounded in memory, the camera captured only a thickening in the gray grain. At the moment of crossing, the footage did something cameras do at the edge of their patience. It smeared light into a gentle blur, like a thumb across chalk. The progress bar at the bottom moved steadily. Time had moved. The scene had stayed much the same. A 7-minute interval contained 4 images, each like a painting of fog. She could have told herself a simple story. The county had a temporary arrangement, an emergency plan old as the roads themselves, and in the confusion of weather and night, they summoned a solution with bolts and chain and habit. That one worked, but it didn't account for a few things it didn't need to account for. The familiar phrasing of the loudspeaker, the way the pilot car's back window held letters from another time, the clean click of the ramp, the grace with which her heavy load had found the angle without lurch or correction. Weeks later, on a different route, she stopped in Stilt House and walked into the diner with the photographs again. A woman behind the counter had a voice that made coffee sound warmer than it was. When Mara asked about the ferry, the woman tilted her head. "You're talking like you took it," she said, friendly, half teasing. "Felt like it," Mara said. The woman poured and leaned a knuckle on the laminate to think. "Fog does what fog wants," she said. "Sometimes it's like a curtain that's opened. Sometimes like one that's closed. I will say this. When the fog is a certain weight, you'll see lights that aren't there when the sun's up. You keep steady and you're fine. You panic and you get yourself in trouble. Same with the river. Same with most things." Mara smiled and lifted the cup in a small toast. On her way out, she passed the bulletin board with yard sale flyers and lost cat notices and tacked to one corner, almost invisible, a faded slip printed in a style nobody used anymore. Passenger ticket, 1 vehicle, 1 driver. Greywater Ferry Company. The price was a number that made no sense in 2020 anything. Someone had written across it in a fine hand. No change given. It looked more blue than black, the way old ink does. She did not take the paper down. She did not take a picture. She stepped into daylight that was clean and regular and returned to a truck that had a job for her hands to do. The map on the passenger seat folded a little more from the vibrations of the road and made the sound maps make a dry, light whisper, like leaves agreeing with wind. In her rear view, the river straightened and bent as the land asked it to, and the bridge's green arch lifted itself above the trees with the good manners of an object, doing its appointed work. She drove on. Now and then, when a fog rises at odd hours and the highway asks for patience, she watches for an amber pulse in a place it shouldn't be. If one appears, she keeps her pace modest and her hands easy. There are detours that don't go on maps. They arrive when all that's needed is quiet agreement, a willingness to follow without showing off. They do what they came to do, and then they fold back into the weather as if they had always been made of it. She doesn't chase them. She lets them come or not. Some nights the world is content to be ordinary. On others, it offers a crossing no one can schedule. And if you're lucky, you get to be delivered without anyone ever asking your name. Story number 3. Silas took the high desert run because it was the kind of night that made a person feel like the earth had been set to quiet. The sky was a dome of deep blue black, a few stars chipped into it. The moon a thin coin he barely saw in the mirrors. The reefer hummed behind him, steady and courteous. His trailer held boxes of lettuce bound for grocery warehouses on the far side of the plateau. The road, an east-west line too straight to argue with, ran through sage and low hills and long stretches of flat where the horizon sat like a ruler. He settled into that rhythm that comes after hours. Eyes relaxed but alert, hands easy, seat adjusted to that angle that lets a driver float in the space between muscle and intention. The dash gave off a gentle glow. A thermos sat in the cup holder, a piece of home disguised as steel. The stereo offered a low song and then a call-in show, and then nothing but the kind of soft silence that is its own company. He passed the occasional ranch gate. He watched for deer. He checked the wind by the grass's posture. He liked this work because the road never asked for more than a person could give. Around mile 87, he noticed a pair of headlights behind him, distant and careful, the way another rig's lights appear when someone else has joined the same line of night. Nothing to think about. He checked his speed. He was legal, maybe 2 over on the downslope. Feather light on the pedal. He moved a touch right in his lane to let the follower see around him. A polite gesture that anyone with miles knew. The lights stayed where they were, small points far back, steady. He thought of other things. The baby picture his sister had sent that afternoon. The clever face of a kid who had just learned how hands worked. The email from dispatch about construction near the border. A note he'd written himself on a folded piece of paper tucked in the door. Buy new flashlight. Batteries. The road ticked by, and he let it. Then the lights behind him changed. Not closer, not farther. They matched him. When he shed a mile an hour on a grade, they shed it too. When he set the cruise back where it had been, they settled as if on a spring. No big deal. Plenty of drivers travel in quiet company without knowing it. The night puts people in pairs. He flicked his right turn signal once, not to move, just to communicate without saying a word. If you want around, I see you. The lights behind him blinked their hazards twice. A friendly thanks drivers give each other on the plains. He smiled. It felt neighborly. He waited for them to pass. They didn't. He signaled left and slid over to the passing lane for a quarter mile. And then, not seeing anyone ahead for a long stretch, slid back again. The lights echoed the move exactly, the kind of precise echo that made his mind turn a notch. Not uncanny, just tidy in a way that wasn't usual. He touched the brake pedal with the gentleness of a man testing a chair before he sits. The brake lights on his trailer glowed red in the mirrors, small and polite. 3 seconds later, the lights behind him brightened too, the same degree. He tried the test again, counted under his breath, and the timing was the same 3 beats and then a mirror of his own action. He said nothing out loud. He checked his mirrors again. The desert didn't blink. The road kept its place. He reached for the CB. No chatter on 19. He rolled the squelch a little, the way people do when they want to be sure the silence is real. Westbound? You're welcome to come around, he said, voice low, a touch of smile in it. The speaker offered only the hush of distance. He tried the company channel with nothing more specific in mind than the desire to hear a voice. It came back empty. Cell service winked down to a bar, and then back up. Thin country. He watched the road ahead. In the distance, a green sign lifted on 2 poles. Starling Gorge, 21 miles. The name carried its own kind of quiet. He'd been through the gorge 100 times, a cut through the low mountains where the road pinched itself to 2 lanes, then widened again after a tunnel and a long sag. He thought of the runaway truck ramp there, and the way its gravel looked like a bed someone had combed with a rake. The followers' lights kept their place. He ate the miles and let the truck work. At the mile marker for 98, the wind nudged him, and he adjusted. The lights nudged. An old piece of road. He shut down everything. The cab went very dark very quickly. The hum of the reefer took on a new weight in the absence of light. He counted slowly, not as a measure of time, but as a way of letting the habit of checking soften and slide away. He turned the key. The dash came alive with its patient blues and greens. He eased back onto the highway, the truck answering him like a good horse. He did not look in the mirrors for 10 miles. It wasn't easy. Mirrors aren't vanity for drivers. They're responsibility. He used the edges of his vision, and he used trust. He felt the road instead of surveying it. He measured the air by the way the trailer rode. He listened to the tires. 10 miles passed. Then another 2. For good measure. He checked. The night was just a night. No lights front or back that wanted commentary. The border checkpoint loomed an hour later, big and lit and friendly in the precise way enforcement can be when it's in a mood to be. He slowed, followed the lines, offered the documents. The agent glanced at his screen, asked how the night was. "Quiet," he said, and that was true. She nodded, waved him through, and for the briefest moment her monitor flickered, and he saw, or thought he saw, a pair of icons representing vehicles, one on top of the other like a reflection. It could have been anything. Screens twitch. People see halos around lampposts when they're tired. He delivered at dawn. Backed into a dock whose concrete held the chill of the night, a little longer than the air did, and signed a paper on a clipboard that had done more traveling than some families. The warehouse buzzed with order and light. He slept in the cab for 3 hours and dreamed of straight lines bending. When he woke, he called his sister and asked about the kid who'd discovered fingers. 2 states seemed less distant when he listened to her laugh. On the way back across the plateau that evening, the sun laid itself down easy. He passed the cafe and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a little salute. The road gathered him up. The gorge sat where the map put it. He went through without incident. At mile 87, he looked in the mirror and saw what he expected to see, a road that belonged to everyone and no one, and sometimes to the idea of itself. Weeks later, on a different night with a different load under a different moon, the lights found him again. He recognized them the way a person recognizes a melody played on a different instrument. He didn't speed up or slow down to test them. He let them be. They matched. He did the thing he'd learned, signaled to step off at a safe turnout, turned the world in his cab to a dark sugar cube, counted to 30 while the reefer breathed like a sleeping animal, and then went on. When he checked at 10 miles, the lights had folded themselves back into the distance. Not gone, not present, just not important. There are places on the highway where stories choose to walk alongside the vehicles who carry them. Sometimes they come with horns and hazard flashers. Sometimes they come as taillights that don't quite obey geometry. Sometimes they come as nothing more than the feeling that the night has asked a person to be brave in a small way. Silas carried the memory without pinning it to a wall. He drove with the same respect he had always had, maybe with a slightly softer grip on the wheel. He told nobody who didn't need telling. If anyone asked whether he believed the stretch had a mirror mile, he would say there are sections of road where past and present run so close together that a person can forget which they're on until the sun sorts them out. He would say the trick to getting through is the same whether or not the lights appear. Keep the pace honest. Break your pattern when the pattern grips you too tightly, and remember that the highway is a listener as much as it is a place to move. Some nights it throws your reflection back at you and expects you to drive like you recognize your own face. He did, and the face he saw most often was simply his, plain and steady, looking ahead, with miles to go and no reason to hurry. Story number 4. Rain had rinsed the day clean and left a gloss on the beltway. The city was a dim crown on the horizon, windows twinkling like slow stars, the air soft with leftover humidity. She had a dry van under her, the trailer white as a blank page, loaded with cartons of ordinary goods, paper towels, box soap, the kind of cargo that made sense even at 2 in the morning. The ring road that circled the metro slid out in long curves, the kind of modern highway that wears its signs like jewelry, green exit boards, blue services panels, and every few miles an amber-lit message board hung over the lanes like a quiet judge. She liked the beltway at that hour. Delivery schedules thinned to a trickle between midnight and dawn. The slow lane belonged to the long haulers, the middle lane to people with appointments before light, the left lane mostly to ghosts. Wipers ticked now and then as mist formed and dissolved. The engine held a comfortable tone. The phone sat face down. The CB offered the residual murmur of truck world range checks, a comment about a slick ramp, a weather report from someone who used to be a DJ and never lost the habit. The first message board came up as she cleared a long flyover. Wipers on? Lights on. It was a normal reminder, the kind of line a state dot fed the system when the weather didn't require panic. She smiled. The headlights were already on. They had been since dusk. 2 miles later, another board told her, expect wet shoulders. Also ordinary. Freeways like this one kept their counsel and shared what they could, offering a handful of words and asking drivers to fill in the rest. She settled in. A box truck drifted by and then took the next exit, an arrow of taillights on wet pavement. The dash clock advanced at the pace it was paid to. The next board read, slow down. Move over, it's the law. Routine. She passed under it with the feeling that the city had become a plain and the highway a river that didn't mind being man-made. Past mile 48, the sign said something she had never seen. Blue cab with silver stripe. Keep both hands. She glanced up without meaning to, and then immediately back to the road, as if looking any longer would break a rule. The description landed too neatly to ignore. Her rig wore a blue cab with a silver stripe it had since the day the company had slapped vinyl over paint, proud of a rebrand. Plenty of trucks could fit that description. The night had dozens of them. She closed her mouth before she could say anything into an empty cab. Wipers shushed once. Brake lights from a sedan in the distance grew and shrank in the soft air. When she passed under the next gantry, she half expected to see an apology for the odd specificity. Instead, the sign offered a clock and an instruction. Exit 40, 3 inches 2 min. Do not exit there. Her route sheet, clipped to the visor, had exit 43 highlighted in blue. That ramp led to the industrial spur and the distribution center that took deliveries at odd hours. It wasn't a suggestion for later. It was the plan. She felt a small, old coin weight in the stomach that arrives when something contradicts a map. She thought of construction. She thought of a spill. She thought of 4,000 reasons a ramp could be a mistake for one night only. She thumbed the CB and asked on 19 if anyone had eyes on 43 eastbound. No answer came. The channel gave her the whisper of atmospherics, and someone singing quietly to themselves a few miles away. She stayed in the lane. The next sign cut the time again. Exit 40, 3 inches, 1 min. No shoulder past ramp. Do not exit. She made a decision the way drivers often do, by leaning slightly, by letting her foot agree, by trusting that the voice she could not see was not a joke. She stayed on the beltway. The ramp appeared with its run-up of reflectors and its green placard bright in the rain-washed dark. She passed it like passing a familiar storefront closed for the evening. A glance, a tincture of regret, a nod to caution. There was no barricade, no flares, only wet pavement and routine. 1 mile later, a heavy wrecker sat tucked on the gore of 44, with its hazards lit and a small service truck behind it. Ahead of them, the silhouette of something large lay sideways in the gloom on the ramp of 43, half lit by the wrecker's amber pulse. No drama reached the main line. No sirens chased themselves. The scene kept to itself behind guardrail and grade, a problem for a different alignment of lanes. She felt a soft twinge of gratitude, not showy, the kind you give the world for steering you around what you didn't need to see. The beltway curved. The city withdrew and returned, as it does around a ring. She watched her speed, watched the lines glisten into 2, then 1, then 2 again. At mile 41, the board woke up as she approached. The amber pixels arranged themselves, then settled into a line. You are tired earlier than you think. Take a breath now. She laughed out loud, a small, sheepish sound, because the sentence wore the exact cadence of a person who had seen 3 in the morning more times than most. She did as told, not because the sign had authority, but because breath is free. The air came cool through the vent. She let the inhale fill the space beneath ribs, and then leave without complaint. The truck felt grateful too, in the way machines feel, grateful when their operator pays attention. Just before the big interchange where 2 interstates crossed like threads, the message boards multiplied, 1 over each lane. The left said, left lane closed 2 miles ahead. The middle said, stay in this lane. The right said, local traffic, exit 37 to 35. Above the middle, the words changed once more as she drew near. Middle lane perfect. Hazard ahead. Center lane clearest. For 1.5 miles. She stayed where she was. 2 minutes later, A chunk of retread sat intact in the right lane, a black alligator asleep on wet asphalt. In the left, a sedan's driver had chosen to change a tire near the barrier, hazard lights dimmed by spray, their figure a bright blur. The middle read like a sentence with proper commas. She passed without incident, without a bump, without any story to take out at breakfast, besides the feeling that something had reached forward into the next mile and removed a hand from her shoulder. At the service plaza that sprawled neatly over a curve of the Beltway, she considered pulling in just to stand under a roof and consider a cinnamon roll. The ramp to the plaza had its own small LED bar on a stand. It flicked to life as she arrived and announced in even capitals, "If you need a break, take one. If not, keep rolling. Safe to continue." She kept rolling. She planned to stop after, at the outer ring's quieter oasis where the parking had more elbow to it. She pulled the visor route sheet down to see where she'd need to jump off now that she'd skipped 43. The next legal truck route into the industrial park was 39. The sign above said, "Warner, exit. 39. Open. Use center exit." She blinked, because there was no center exit, just a standard right-hand departure. As she approached, the lane markers changed character, and a white arrow painted on the asphalt pointed through a very brief exit-only lane that had been coned in for construction the last time she'd come through. The cones were stacked like orange chess pieces against the barrier. The ramp lay clean. She signaled, checked mirrors, took it, and everything felt as if the road had been made 5 minutes earlier for exactly that movement. On the smaller highway that led beneath the viaducts and into the industrial district, she saw a service truck on a shoulder with a light bar that made its own small galaxy. A worker in a reflective jacket stood with arms crossed, staring at the message board up top of the Beltway where she'd just passed. He shook his head once, not in anger, just in the bafflement of someone who could fix things and had found nothing broken. By the time the dock was loaded and paperwork signed, the sky had taken a shade lighter at its eastern edge. She angled back up the ramps toward the ring and found the amber boards asleep. "No messages, drive safe," they said. The phrase the system defaulted to when its laptop had been unplugged or rained on. She took it with joy. The night had been fair. The Beltway had behaved like a friend who watches your back and then goes quiet, not because it has nothing to say, but because you don't need saying. The next night, on the outbound leg toward a different warehouse, the boards woke again with plain, kind sentences. "Check your mirrors," they said. "Turn signals, save trouble. Give room." Then, just past the river bridge, a particular line, "Do not look for the source. Keep your eyes ahead." The phrasing had a tone somewhere between a lullaby and a reminder your grandparents would leave on the fridge. She took the advice. When she caught herself glancing up at the gantries to see if there were cameras pointed right at her, she kept her gaze on the taillights she was respectfully following. Half an hour later, at the north bend where the Beltway passes a long sweep of warehouse roofs, the drizzle returned like a rumor. A message arrived with a kind of urgency the others had not had. "Right shoulder not safe. Do not stop." Then, "Wrecker now on left. Move right now." She signaled, checked, moved. Seconds later, a tow rig eased onto the left shoulder from a ramp, hauling a disabled car backward by its front wheels, as clean and professional as dancers in a slow number. It wasn't a near miss. It was just something that would have pressed the brake a little harder if she hadn't known. She drove on without commentary. She told herself a story that asked for no ghosts. Sign networks were clever. Cameras watched and logic snapped into place. Maybe some pilot program ran more conversational scripts. Maybe the AI behind the curtain had been trained on a library of phrases that included "little bit personal," because engineers had been up too late and had a sense of humor. That story fit, except when it didn't. It didn't fit at the small rest area just past mile 22, where the board on the entry ramp quietly displayed "blue cab with silver stripe, parking available row C," then changed to 2 words that held a gentleness she didn't expect on a highway light. "Sleep well." She didn't stop. She had miles to make and coffee that didn't believe in sleep. But the words followed her like a song you don't plan to hum, and then find you are humming anyway. A week later, she stopped at a truck-friendly cafe off exit 17, the kind with a glass case of pies and a bulletin board thick with business cards. Over coffee, she mentioned the talking boards to a man in a vest, who had his own way of standing like he spent his days up on ladders. He smiled into his cup. "Boards are mostly dumb," he said, not unkindly. "We push messages to them. We schedule the boring ones. We override for crashes. Sometimes the automation gets chatty. People blame the machine for being folksy when it's really just lines we wrote 2 summers ago and forgot about. Mine said things I don't think you could have pre-written," she said, and made the phrase "blue cab with silver stripes" sound lighter than it had been. He shrugged in that way that admits the world is bigger than his job. "Weird things catch," he said. "You ever see the old panels up close? Some still have old sticker shadows under the plexi, from before LEDs. You go under at night and reflection off your glass can look like words." She nodded because you nod when a tidy answer is offered and you are a person who needs to get back on the road. On her way out, she noticed a small frame on the wall near the exit. A faded photo of 3 men on a lift truck, one holding a tool above a sign face, the other looking down laughing. Under it, a plate read, "In memory of Anthony M. District Sign Shop, 1962, 2008. He kept the words on. When she rolled that night, she waited to see if the boards would be quiet. They were at first. "Employee Appreciation Day ahead. Obi posted speed," said one. "Tire check saves lives," said another. She cruised into the low, wide curve at mile 30, where the beltway crosses wetland, the dark water on both sides lying like polished stone. The message above the causeway woke and arranged itself into 3 short lines. "Light crosswind. Hands steady. Count to 5. She did, hearing tires hiss their faint music. At 5, a tug moved through the cab, crosswind and bridge and box and sail and physics. It was nothing a driver hadn't felt 100 times. It was simply announced as if by someone who had timed the weather with a clock and wanted to share. Later, approaching the clamp of the long tunnel beneath the airport's runway, the sign over the middle lane displayed a single word: quiet. It wasn't an instruction, not quite. It was a description, like calling a color what it was. She passed into the tunnel, and the radio lost its grip on the station it had had, and the world did indeed become quiet in a way that felt curated. A plane rolled above, the sound of it like distant rain on a roof you don't own. At dawn, she parked in a row with other trucks under a sky that went from violet to gray with unhurried certainty. Before she slept, curiosity tugged. She pulled footage from her dash cam and scrolled to the time she'd passed under the boards. The screen showed amber signs that said what amber signs usually say: "Buckle up, left lane ends 2 miles. Expect delays." The line that had instructed her not to exit at 43 read "Buckle up." The line that had remembered a stripe on a cab read "Check tires in rain." She watched her own reaction in the reflection of the glass glances, breaths, the little chin tilt that says a person is considering the absurd. On the video, the night had been exactly as a person with no taste for mystery would describe it. She closed the file with a small smile. She wasn't sure anyone else would understand. A month passed and work took her and the blue cab to another city's ring. Signs there were of a different design, boxy and stern. They spoke in exactly the tone municipal signs prefer. She missed the other beltway the way you might miss a voice, not because it said anything brilliant, but because of the way it had said ordinary things with care. When her route brought her back, she felt a little absurd comfort wash over her when the first board said, "Watch for merging traffic ahead." The next said, "Thank you for the space you give. Keep it easy." That night, lying in the sleeper with the hum of reefers nearby turning into a kind of lullaby, she thought of a man on a lift with a tool in his hand, and a grin he couldn't stop because somebody had shouted a joke from the ground. She thought of an industry that runs at odd hours, and the small acts of courtesy that keep it human. She didn't need the boards to tell her anything she didn't already know. She liked them anyway. Once, on a night when the fog, threadbare as gauze, sat low over the wetlands, the board just before the causeway produced a sequence so gentle she almost missed it. You're almost through this part, then the next part, then the coffee. It felt like a joke and a blessing. She laughed once, a sound that belonged to nobody but the inside of the cab, and rolled on. Other drivers passed, each with their own relationship to the signs and to the night. She did not mention it on the radio, not because she was afraid of being teased, but because some things are like a good shoulder massage best when you don't narrate it. In daylight, on an errand that put her past the DOT district office, She pulled into visitor parking and walked the hallway where the sign shop kept its models. Behind glass, a small amber board clicked through messages on a timer. Test phrases with X's and 8 seconds. Old slogans that had been retired. Bits of code. On a table nearby lay a binder with laminated sheets of approved messages in black print. She flipped until she found yourself, a little, in a column headed, Fatigue. Take. A break fatigue kills had a line drawn through it in blue pen, replaced with, You are tired earlier than you think. Take a breath now. Someone had signed the change. The signature was a small, looping T. She closed the binder and put it back where she'd found it, as if returning a book in a quiet library. Walking out into the ordinary sun, the kind that warms hoods and wakes birds who work nights, she felt a small shift in her bones like the road had tipped an inch to accommodate the wheel. There are stretches of highway that behave like they've learned drivers' names without knowing them. On those miles, the signs do more than publish facts. They speak like neighbors over a fence, gently, pointedly, without drama. She gave them the same thing she gave the road, when it didn't require anything fancy: attention, respect, and the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes, at the very end of a long beltway loop, when dawn leaned on the earth and the signs began to look a little sleepy themselves, she would pass under one that woke just long enough to offer a final sentence. Shift completed. 331 safe miles. Or, more simply, thank you for staying awake. She would answer it the way a driver answers everything, by keeping pace, by letting the truck hum, by watching for the next mile marker, and by letting the highway speak in whatever language it had ready in the night. Story number 5. The lake slept under a lid of iron, its surface dark as graphite. The air sweet with the clean scent that comes when waves have been scissoring at rock all day. Rowan took the night lane along that water with a steady load of palletized staples. The route slid between coves and causeways and stretches of highway where the wind made a low, patient sound against the cab. The trailer rode true. The tires whispered their ribbon song. On the dash, the little transponder for the scale network sat quiet as a coin until it didn't. A double beep cut the cab. Not the friendly bypass chirp, but the other one, the pull-in. He looked ahead and saw the low green glow on the horizon that meant an open way station. The sign over the right lane confirmed it. Scales open all trucks, next right. He didn't mind. Weight was honest. Axles were right. Paperwork was simple. Sometimes the scales were nothing but a punctuation mark in a sentence of miles. He signaled early because night requests good manners when there are other trucks on. A few sets of marker lights moved out of his way and drifted back when he had cleared. The ramp down to the scale house lay neat, a gentle curve trimmed with reflectors that popped in his headlights like a breadcrumb trail. A light rain had started needles more than drops, which gave the pavement a sheen that made the lanes look elegantly underlined. The way station had the look of a small compound that knew its routine. A low brick building with a glass window toward the lanes, a bank of sodium lamps that drew a circle of amber around the scales, a signboard that could be coaxed into different instructions by a person at a keyboard. The sign over his lane read, Single stop, scale 5 miles per hour. No brakes on scale. A second line lit all axles. He eased into first, let the truck do the work, and pointed his nose down the center of the paint. The office window was lit, but the space beyond showed no movement. Often you saw the shape of a weighmaster, a shoulder, the tilt of a head, the lazy swing of a hand. Tonight, just the glow of a desk lamp on paper, and the faint rise of steam from what could have been a forgotten cup. He rolled to the first axle mark and let the truck settle. The platform beneath him had that light, echoey resonance that told of machinery underfoot. The number on the small roadside screen flicked from dashed lines to digit steers good. He crept the next few feet, careful and exact, as if sliding coins along a bar to a person he respected. A speaker above the window crackled and welcomed him with a voice that had a gentleness to it, as if the owner of it had been awake at odd hours so often that their tone had become a place people could sit down in. Cab with the silver stripe, that's a pretty job of centering, the voice said. Hold where you are, let me get you a legal. He blinked at the phrase legal, singular, and looked again beyond the glass. The desk sat empty. A wall clock held its hands at 2:37. Rowan checked his own time. 1:53 by the dash. He could write that off to battery backups failing in storms, to clocks being always slightly wrong. He breathed in and could smell, faintly, in the cool, damp air, old paper and coffee gone polite. "All right," the speaker said. "Gross looks tidy. Bring the drives onto the pad. Let her settle. No brakes." He did as told. The motion smooth as a thought finishing itself. The numbers rose and steadied. He watched the red digits with the easy curiosity of a person who knows what they should say. They said exactly what they should say, and yet something in the way the units clicked upward had an old-fashioned rhythm to it, as if the system counted with a different kind of pulse. The speaker gave him a small approval that came out sounding like the end of a song. "Good. Pull through with the tandems and hold." He went ahead. One more small slide, one more hush of tires over rumpled steel. The pad registered. The digits found their rest. He waited for the customary instruction, "You're good. Roll safe." Instead, "Do me a favor," the voice said, almost conversational. "Before you go, hop down and put your glove on that fifth wheel release. Make sure it's all the way home. Handle might have vibrated light in this mist." Rowan's hand went instinctively to the visual memory in the mirror handle. Looked normal. But the combination of mist and long road can work at small, stubborn things. He set the brake, flipped on his four ways, and stepped out. The rain felt like a fine comb through hair. The station's sodium lamps made halos on every bead of water and softened every shadow until the night looked like it was shot on old film. He walked along the driver's side familiar, worn-in steps and crouched by the fifth wheel. The handle sat tucked, yes, but not as deep as it could. He set his palm on it and felt the lightest give, a shiver of compliance like the way a door closes the last quarter-inch when you lay your hand to it. He pushed. It clicked with the quietest sound in the world. Not loose, not unsafe, just not perfect. The kind of not quite that becomes a story if the wrong pothole finds you. He stood with the handle still under his glove and looked toward the office window. The desk lamp burned that little circle. The clock in there still said 2:37. The chair behind the counter held the shape of a recent body, the fabric made into a shallow basin by years of shifts. He couldn't see a person. He did not feel alone. He climbed back into the cab, shook rain from his sleeves, and rolled the window down a stretch so the speaker could catch him. "Appreciate that," he said, the way drivers speak to anyone who has just saved them a problem they'd prefer not to imagine fully. "Not a bit of trouble," the speaker returned. "You want a pull ticket?" "Sure. Hold." The tonal change made a soft space, like someone leaning sideways in a chair to reach a different drawer. A mechanical chirr came from the pedestal at the end of the window, and a slip of paper rose into a little slot with all the ceremony of a mail coming up a tube. Rowan reached and took it. The cardstock had the faint stiffness of something printed by an older kind of machine. The black lines were crisp, but ever so slightly soft at the edges, the way impressions made by impact print are soft, the ink touching tiny threads in the paper, rather than lying on top like a sticker. Rowan trucking, the ticket read at the top, because the system had his carrier. Under it, date. And where there should have been numbers, a roll of black type blocks had whispered 11 joules UN. The year mark looked wrong. 2 digits, where there should be 4. Gross. Axle 1, Axle 2, Axle 3, tear. The numbers were right, to the pound. At the bottom, HAN, thanks R. Klein. He didn't know the name. He knew the neatness of the signature. It looked like someone who had written their name at a counter 1,000 times. "Go on out," the speaker said kindly. "Stay on the center of the causeway when you hit it. The lake is teasing the left shoulder tonight and the barrels spook easy." The barrels. He pictured the chunky white and orange drums that highway departments set to mark nothing in particular, except where drivers ought not to go. He could imagine wind pulling at them. He put the truck in gear. The scale pad let a soft, hollow sound escape as he rolled off. As he passed the office window, he thought he saw movement at the far edge of the glass, the hem of a shirt, the curve of a shoulder. He didn't slow. He did what he had been doing all night, held the wheel correctly, and guided the long wait he was responsible for. Back on the main line, the world reopened with that easy yawn highways do when you rejoin their flow. A sign for the causeway stood up ahead, white O-grown, polite in its capital letters. The water at either side appeared as a darker dark, the rain lightening to a kind of mist that lights could turn into velvet. He centered himself between the white lines and met the wind, with his jaw set the way you said it, when you have no argument with physics but would like a little courtesy from it. On the left, 3 barrels stood in a tight attitude near the end of the guardrail, the furthest of them doing a small, persuasive dance in the push of air. It leaned once, twice, and then scooted a little into the lane, like a child testing limits. He had room. He had warning. He passed with the honest margin he would have had even without the voice, and the barrel, unoffended, settled back into place as the wind lost interest. On the far end of the causeway, a trooper had stationed a cruiser at an angle, with its light bar making blue notes on the mist. He was out of the car in a yellow jacket, head turned toward the lake. Rowan raised a few fingers off the wheel in thanks for the presents, and the trooper, without looking, lifted a hand in response. A small exchange in a big night. He'd planned to roll on until the big plaza under the low hill where the coffee came in thick white mugs and the parking was a straight-a-back. But after the edge of what he had felt, he settled for a pull-off at a smaller plaza under pines. He set the brake and let the engine idle down, then shut it to complete silence. Rain on the roof made the sound of carbonated water poured into a glass. He sat a minute, the way a person does after a conversation they don't want to poke with analysis. Then he took the ticket out of his pocket and held it closer to the dash light. Thanks, R. Klein. He flipped the visor down and found the pre-pass information card they'd given him at orientation. On the back was a list of regional numbers for the way stations you were supposed to call if your transponder failed or if you'd noticed something amiss. He called the one for the district he was in, not because of any problem, but because curiosity, when it arrives gentle, sometimes deserves the courtesy of an outlet. A polite recording listed options. He picked Station Ops. A ring, then a set of clicks, then a man with a voice the shade darker than the one that had come through the speaker. Station's closed until 6, the man said, friendly enough. We do night operations by remote if the system tells us to, but tonight's quiet. You having trouble? No, sir. Everything worked perfect. You sure you called the right number? I'm sure, Rowan smiled. Just wanted to say thank you for someone telling me to check my fifth wheel. Saved me an annoyance. Good to hear. A pause that had the sound of a head cocked. No one on premises tonight. The remote's automatic no voice except prompts. What time did you roll through? He told him. Another pause. Well, the man said, settling into a tone that suggested he'd seen the highway shrug off tidy answers before. I'll take the compliment anyway. I've got one staff left who even knows how to run that old single-stop scale without the whole building howling. Most of them came up on Way in Motion. Klein used to baby that pad like it was a grand piano. Retired him in May. If you saw his name on some machine, it's because he couldn't stand to leave without labeling everything. He was a neatnik. R. Klein, Rowan read from the ticket. Because he could. Because the little black letters felt like something he could place in the room between them. The man on the line made a small sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. Yeah, he said. Rick. We all called him R. Klein, because it was how he signed his notes. Old habit from a time when pen strokes meant something. That old pad scheduled for retirement this fall. More modern kit coming. Maybe it's saying its goodbyes. They said theirs. Rowan hung up with the calm feeling that a little corner of the world had delayed becoming simpler and had chosen to be helpful while it waited. He slept a few hours, woke with first light making a pale band across the pines, and rolled on into the plain morning work of unloading, scanning, signatures. The day had no interest in being eerie. Noon found him a state away, eating an apple at a warehouse bay, while a pallet jack beeped politely behind him. He could have let the night go like a bird startled out of a hedgerow. He did. Mostly. But he found without intending to, that the ticket had threaded itself into the edge of his attention, like music 2 doors down. 2 nights later, in clear air under a crisp spill of stars, he passed the same way station on the opposite side. The signboards were dark. A banner hung on the fence. Future home of WEI, GHINMOTION. The windows of the scale house were black. He could see, through the glass, a desk lamp that had not been switched off but had been unplugged, its cord folded neatly beside it with the kind care people give objects they respectfully intend never to use again. In the darker pane beyond the counter, something white caught the light, and he realized it was a paper taped to a cabinet. Staff appreciation, Night potluck list. And at the bottom, in a distinctive, tidy hand, Beans R. Klein. He smiled in spite of himself. He could see the pot, the steam, the pride someone takes in simple food. On a later run, weather swung back toward lake, mood low, moody skies, and a wind that wore a good coat. The station was officially closed for retrofit. Signs told him so in a font chosen by people who like clarity. He rolled past without changing his speed, and the transponder made the good sound. As he cleared the ramp, the highway threw him a small, unplaceable scent of hot coffee and pencil shavings. It could have been anything. A cup in the cab of a passing rig, a stationary truck somewhere nearby, a trick of brain and memory. He did what he'd learned to do for this kind of moment. Let it be true without needing it to be important. He told no one on the radio. He told no one in the break room. He did, however, check his fifth wheel latch at odd times that week, with the attention of a student who has been gently corrected by a kind teacher. Each time, it sat perfectly. Each time his hand laid on it, some small knot in the mind loosened. A month later, a new sign had gone up a few miles down the road. Way station ahead testing. He took the bypass, because that is what the law asked. In his mirror, the old house sat square and dark beside the new sensors, glowing like the first window on a winter block to turn its light on. He saw for a breath the old lamp in the office flicker, as if the bulb had been bumped by a passing thought. It did not change his steering. He kept the truck steady, the lane true. There are people whose voices make certain kinds of work easier. Sometimes they stand in a booth with a button under a finger. Sometimes they are gone, and the booth remains. The highway has a way of collecting those voices and letting them out in small, useful phrases if you come to them with the right set of ears. Rowan carried the ticket in the binder with his permits, not as a charm, not as proof, but as a tidy piece of paper that had done him a favor. The corner of it lifted after a while, and he smoothed it down. The ink softened into that gray-black that happens when time asks for an equal share of the page. On a winter night when the lake had decided to sing, and the plows wrote new lanes with their blades, he heard a crackle, unexpected, from his CB where there had been only steady hiss. A calm voice uncoiled, neither young nor old, and gave a sentence with no preface. Center of the pad, silver stripe. You've got it. It could have been anybody. It could have been no one. He put his steers where they belonged and felt, in the slip of a heartbeat, an alignment that had nothing to do with numbers. He went on. Story number 6. The fields on either side of the county highway lay flat and patient, stretched out like dark quilts stitched with pale irrigation ditches. Center-o-pivot rigs stood like giant compasses asleep in place, their long arms beaded with a night dew that had not yet fallen. Wind turbines far off blinked their red points in a slow, considerate rhythm. The cab smelled faintly of coffee, and cab upholstery warmed in the day and cooling now. Noor took the night along that ribbon with the kind of focus that didn't feel tight attention like a hand on a shoulder, not a fist. Her trailer was loaded with dry goods for a Tings distribution center that kept its lights on all night. Cereal, bagged rice, bulk tea. The road she'd chosen wasn't the usual one. A detour sign earlier on the state route had politely insisted on a longer way around, but a driver in a gravel company pickup had leaned out his window at a four-way and called across, "Take County 12, smoother, rail crossing's dead, but it's level. You'll like it." He had the air of someone who knew every fence post by its first name. She'd nodded, signaled, and let the truck discover a line of blacktop that wore its age like a well-kept jacket. County 12 asked for no climb, no careful descent. It went through the landscape like a sentence that knows how to read itself out loud. She set her speed a shade under what the sign allowed because the night had a damp edge that made the tires whisper longer. The CB sat low. The stereo offered a station too far away to hold a tune and then gave up with dignity. She didn't mind the private sound of engine and air. A pair of owls worked the fence line, pale coins flipping over and over in the corner of her sight. Some miles in, the highway bent just enough to give the land a change of expression, and a wooden crossbuck appeared ahead, the old kind with black letters across white boards, at a tilt that said weather had moved through 1,000 times. Below it, 2 signal masts faced the road, short and sturdy, each with a round red lens gone dull in daytime but gleaming now under her lights. A small metal box sat on a post by the fence, lid locked, paint faded to a color that wasn't a color anymore. On the right-of-way fence, hung a county notice. Rail service discontinued, corridor preserved. The rail bed beyond was a scar through the wheat stubble, cinder and brown grass. The tracks long pulled up and gone to someone else's salvage yard years ago. Noor had crossed plenty of ghost rails. They announced themselves and then offered nothing more than the relief of a level patch where the road didn't heave under old ties. She watched the crossbuck as she approached with interest, a step short of caution, like noticing a mural in a town she didn't know. County 12's asphalt narrowed by an inch or two where it met the crossing, the stripe worn to a whisper. Then the red lenses woke. They didn't stutter. They didn't test themselves. They came on with the calm authority of a machine that has timed something. Left, right, slow, exact. A heartbeat. The bell came a second later, a clear, small dinging that did not belong to a smartphone world. The sound skimmed the cab and ran out across the field like light across water. Her foot eased and then lifted. She set the brake gently and let the truck settle, the long wait even. The crossing didn't have gates. The old wooden arms that lower and make the decision for you were gone. The signals flashed to nobody's schedule but their own. She looked left down the right-of-way, then right, into a blackness textured by low brush and the occasional pale slice of old ballast. No rails caught her headlights. No steel hummed. No engine noise came. There was only the bell's patient metronome and the slight movement of mist sliding like ribbon low over the ditch. Noor had been taught by a father whose toolbox carried both wrenches and proverbs. If something that has no reason to move is moving, let it, he used to say. Standing over a stubborn machine, her hand found the knob of the shifter, held, let go. The bell kept time. The red eyes blinked their slow, symmetrical refusal. The air changed a little. A smell that had not been in it before arrived like the memory of a room. Creosote. The tarry sweetness of treated timbers warmed by summers and cooled by winters. And underneath that, cold iron. It was faint. It was particular. It belonged to rail yards and ties, stacked neat by a siding, not to open wheat at midnight. Her mind did the cataloging a mind does. She named it and then put the name away. Without fuss, she sat with the brake set and let the truck idle. Markers twinkling across the half-mile of quiet road like small benevolent ships at a harbor mouth. A pale glow gathered low on the right-of-way, as if a flashlight were being walked toward the crossing along the ghost ditch. Not a headlight bloom, not a sweep. It grew, held, and for a heartbeat gave the impression of something enormous and low coming through a place that hadn't bounded anything that heavy in decades. The bell counted. The red eyes stayed on their patient left-right. The glow passed as if it had always been there and had moved only because time asked it to reposition itself. She heard nothing, but a pressure like a wind from a passing bulk leaned once across the front of the cab and then let her alone. When the last of that impression had gone, the bell stopped. The red eyes timed out. The world reclaimed its ordinary dark. Noor's hand went to the shifter and eased, and then she saw movement in the right corner of her low beams beyond the crossbuck where the ditch dipped. Dark threaded across the road, steady and without hurry. It was only when the foremost shape turned its head and two eyes returned her light as flat coins that she understood what the crossing had put between her and the next minute. Cattle, black and broad-backed, stepped through a gap in the fence as neat as a door and made their line across County 12 with a collected indifference to paint and schedules. 12, 15, more, each one taking the crown of the road in the rain-shined light. There was room, because she had made room. If she had come at the posted speed, if she had leaned into the night the way a person sometimes leans when they think they know a road, her bumper would have met the first flank with a sound that would have lived in the ear. As it was, she watched a parade of calm animals make their old, precise decisions in a world where most decisions are new and imprecise. She sat, hands on the wheel, the engine idling, and let them pass the way a person lets a river pass beneath a bridge. A light appeared along the fence line, a handheld beam, then a second, then the rising half-circle of a pickup's headlamps cresting a field approach. A figure in a reflective vest jogged toward the break in the fence, met the leaders with broad, practiced shapes of arms, and persuaded the rest to tighten their line. He didn't seem surprised to find a semi at a full stop in the middle of the story. He lifted the flashlight once in a mild salute, the universal country thank you, and the cattle continued, ankles neat, breathing like a quiet tide. When the last tail slipped into grass, and the man turned to pull a length of wire back into a temporary approximate fence, she released the brake and rolled the truck forward to the crossbuck and stopped again. Out of respect for the habit of stopping there, no lights flashed. No bell spoke. Wind caught the wheat and made it kneel an inch. She eased across the right-of-way. The truck felt large and careful. On the far side, in the narrow periphery of the beam, a small metal plaque on the signal mast showed in worn letters, Blackbird Line Mile 211. Cross. Number 846. DAD. In the lower corner, a sticker half-peeled read, Stop Look Liston. A little over the top for an abandoned crossing, but it fit the night. County 12 let her back into its long sentence. She drove as if someone were asleep in the next room. A convenience store at a crossroads lit its placard. A sudden green in the way such signs do when their fluorescent bulbs make decisions about their lives without consulting anyone. On the CB, a voice from another road talked about a blown strap in a tone as even as if discussing breakfast. The turbines blinked their red eyes, and further along the horizon, she could make out the glow of the town that had a bakery that pretended to be open at 5 and managed it by 6. She made her delivery. The warehouse smelled of cardboard and forklifts. The paperwork shuttled between hands and barcode guns without anyone needing to raise their voice. On her way back toward the interstate, curiosity tugged in a light, non-urgent way. She swung by a small truck stop near County 12 and parked in the line of sleepers with their curtains drawn. Inside, the coffee refilled itself by means of a woman who moved like someone who had learned to listen to the room without being told to. Noor sat at the counter with a grilled cheese and said, because the urge to say a thing sometimes grows legs. That old crossing on 12 Blackbird, does it ever wake up? The woman's face had that pleasant immovability that good counter people cultivate. She leaned an elbow. It'll flash you now and then, she said, like she was talking about a neighbor. Officially, it's retired. Rails are gone to Utah, I heard. The county keeps meaning to take out the masts, and then they don't get to it. And yet, in certain weathers, if you ask the right people, they'll say it still tells you when to stop. My uncle says it saved him a mailbox once. A mailbox? Noor smiled. Car with no lights took that jog by the grain elevator too lively, the woman said. He was pulling out in the Colorado and stopped at the ding. The other fellow ate the mailbox instead of my uncle. Everybody wrote it off to coincidence. Uncle thinks coincidences are manners for the universe. A man at the far end of the counter turned his cup slowly and nodded without looking over. Used to be a signalman lived in a little house by that crossing, he said into the coffee. Back when signalman meant a fellow with a wrench and an oil can and a coat that didn't mind weather. He told my dad once that all machines learn the habits you teach them. Sometimes they try to keep them after you don't ask anymore. Blackbird was fussy. Stayed fussy. Flood in '88 took a section of track. They rebuilt. Then they gave up 20 years later when trucks started doing the work for a lot of reasons. I go through there and it flashes at me sometimes in fog. I stop. I don't mind being a minute later than I would have been. Noor let the grilled cheese be what it was supposed to be. On her way out, near the bathroom door, a corkboard held business cards and little index slips with big handwriting, looking for team driver, and church basement sale, and math tutor reasonable. Pinned among them, yellowed and curled at the edges, was a paper about the size of a hand, with a little locomotive printed on it in a cheerful mid-century style, and the words in a jaunty font. Stop. Look. Listen. Somebody had drawn a smile in ballpoint in the smoke from the cartoon stack. She slept a few hours in the cab in a corner of the lot where a pine kept the world from being too large. When she woke, the sun thought about being a solid disk and then decided to drag its feet. She took County 12 again, because there are experiments better done in daylight. The crossing sat there plain and unmagical, paint flaking, box locked, crossbuck leaning with more charm than dignity. The signal heads looked like someone had buffed the lenses at some point and then lost interest. She rolled over the right-of-way at 5 miles an hour and felt nothing but that telegraphed shift from one kind of road to another that you feel even when the road is perfect. In the ditch, wheat had woven itself into old ballast. A crow stomped in the stubble with the decision-making power of a mare. Later, back on the main line, she scrolled through dashcam footage because curiosity is an engine that idles quietly but doesn't like to be ignored. The tape showed the crossbuck flicker into life. Only, when she paused and framey stepped, The red lenses on the recording were just reflections of her marker lights bending on curved glass, a trick of angle and moisture. The bell on the soundtrack was the steady clink of rain off her ladder treads, amplified by the camera's ear. The glow low along the right-of-way was a smear from a distant wind turbine's beacon, dragged wider by the sensor in low light. Except that the timestamp showed her sitting a full minute and 40 seconds without creeping, and the angle of her wheel stayed turned ever so slightly into a posture of respect. The cattle were very real on the video, dark masses crossing with the serenity of tide. That was enough explanation to close the box if a person wanted it closed. She didn't force it shut. She let it be a lid that never quite held, and that was fine. A week later, in real fog, not the light threadbare gauze of dew but honest river valley fog, she returned by chance to the same county road. The world was smaller. Sounds came to the cab and halted, as if confused by a threshold. Ahead, the crossbuck appeared as a pale X, and then a set of red coins smudged their way into glowing. The bell tapped at the air with the old gentleness. She was less surprised than she would have thought, which is different from being unsurprised. She stopped. 30 seconds later, a flatbed pickup carrying irrigation pipe drifted through the crossing on the perpendicular farm track with its headlights off. Kid, probably, worried about waking neighbors, making a wrong kind of courtesy. The pipe shivered and sang as it went by. The fog closed behind it like a door. She breathed and smiled in the way relief makes people smile without teeth. In the fall, harvest turned the fields gold, and then stubble, and then soil. The crossbuck watched. She heard from a driver at a co-op that the county had scheduled removal of the masts for some time before the snow. Then someone else said the grant had been delayed. Then winter came and brought a sideways snow that made sound behave strangely and made the road wear a soft, convincing uniform. When the wind died and the cold grew honest and steady, the bell at Blackbird tapped a little at noon as if trying the air. A crew from the county came by with a truck and looked at the locked box and stood with hands in their pockets and then left. The masts remained. There were nights after that when the crossing slept, and she slept without thinking of it. There were a few clean, specific nights when it woke at exactly the right time. Once, she stopped because it told her to, and a big, low processional of cranes stepped across the right-of-way line by the stubble, their bodies all shadow and leg, and careful patience. Once, there was nothing at all after the bell. She waited anyway, counted to 30, went on, felt mildly foolish, then not. A habit of courtesy isn't a bad thing to carry. At a holiday potluck thrown in a maintenance bay behind the truck stop, she sat with a handful of local drivers and shop guys and a woman from the county office who could make paperwork sound like a clean kitchen. The talk got around to places on the road that have personalities. The woman said, "We pulled the rails because time said to. We left the corridor because time might say otherwise. When we get around to decommissioning the signals, we'll cut power and haul them. Until then, sometimes they pull their own power out of air. Old electronics are like old dogs. They don't always do what you tell them, but they do what they think you meant." A man who had hanged his cap on his knee and rolled a pen between his fingers added, "My granddad ran the rail truck out of Blackbird. He said that crossing had a way of telling him if the day was going to require extra patience. Said if the bell sounded dull, it meant snow by supper. If it sounded bright, it meant clear track. Probably he heard what he wanted. He outlived all his 5-day forecasts by 30 years. The night turned. The lot filled with reefers, whose combined hum made a tone like a choir learning a note. Noor rolled again through that county as winter thinned, and spring put water in the ditches. The crossbuck stood. The masts rested. The little metal box kept its simple lock. She stopped when instructed by nothing she could name, and was never sorry. When it did not ask, she did not invent. The road offered her more miles. She took them carefully. There are places on the map where the past keeps a duty roster, even when the job's been taken away. Once in a while, an old habit of safety wakes long enough to escort a person through a minute they didn't know needed escorting. Maybe the bell is only rain tapping the ladder in a tone a tired person mistakes for an instruction. Maybe the red lenses are only reflections. Maybe a machine that hasn't had power in 10 years borrows a little from the weather and gives it back as caution. It doesn't really matter which story wins. When the highway carried her past the wheat and into hills that smelled like pine, and later through towns stitched together by the same kind of streetlights, she kept the same easy rules. Hands steady, eyes up, listen for what the night can tell without words. If a crossbuck blinked, She would stop and let whatever needed to happen. If the way was clear, she would ease back onto the gas and return to the larger river of road that didn't much care whether she believed in bells. She never raced the crossing, and the crossing never scolded. They observed each other the way good neighbors do from their own porches, hands wrapped around something warm, certain there would be time to talk if there had to be, content to nod in the meantime. And on nights when the world pressed close and the tires sang a little louder, she thought she could just catch, in the untroubled air, the faintest sweetness of creosote, a suggestion that somewhere, on a ledger nobody kept anymore, somebody had ticked a box, waited, and because they waited, everyone got where they were going. Story number 7. The mountain road was open because winter had decided to pause, not end. Snow lay pulled back into the trees like a blanket folded to the foot of a bed. The plow berms along the shoulder held low, tidy walls, tidy enough to suggest crews that knew the curve of every switchback in their sleep. The air was glass cold without cruelty. Orion hung like a simple drawing above the ridgeline. A tractor trailer moved up through the grade with the patience such nights require. Diesel warm and steady, tires humming on pavement that had been dried by a brief day's sun and then chilled flat. Jonah took the pass because the interstate had been closed for night work down in the valley, and the official detour added hours he didn't have if he wanted to beat the doc's morning shift by a hair. The state route over Swallowtail Pass wasn't the worst road in summer and wasn't the best in January, but this wasn't January at its worst. He knew the radius of the curves, the posture a loaded trailer takes in crosswind at mile 8, the view of the canyon mouth that opens without warning after the fourth hairpin like a door onto a stage. The cab held a dry warmth that smelled faintly of road dust baked into rubber mats. His thermos rode secure, but untouched. He preferred both hands on the wheel for this stretch. The CB offered a light drizzle of range checks and a far-off plow crew, exchanging numbers in a tone as calm as carpenters. The dash read a patient 28 degrees. The chain-up lights had been dark at the last pullout. A message board in warm amber had said, "Chains not required, use caution." He would have done that anyway. Swallowtail ran along a canyon for 5 mountain miles, where the right lane pinched, guardrail leaned, and the rock wall kept its shoulder too close for comfort. Recent rockfall repairs had narrowed it further. At night, traffic through the canyon was metered. Simple red-green gates with countdown clocks, 1 lane open at a time, take turns. At the base, a sign in a tidy font announced, "Night alternating 1, way traffic expect, 7-min delay." He rolled up behind 2 pickups and a box truck and watched the gate hold red with an exactitude that suggested a machine that likes obedience. He eased the brake and let the rig rest. The canyon's breath pushed a hand across the front grille and left. His headlights picked out the simple galvanized pole on which the signal head perched. The red lens glowed with that deep, warm tone that belongs to glass and not to plastic. Below, a rectangular tint showed where an older sign had once been bolted and later removed. Jonah watched the countdown clock next to the red eye work down with a purposeful slowness. 122, 121. He reached for the CB and let 19 know he was waiting southbound. A voice farther up, and Overridge answered with, "Copy you. Southbound at the gate. Northbound got released. Plows staged at summit. Slow on the right-hand kinks some grit down, but she's tidy." The world, hearing its affidavit read aloud, agreed. The red held, the numbers unwound and landed on 0. He expected the light to change. It didn't. The digital face went blank. 2 beats of nothing. Then, instead of red fading to green, the red eye fell dark entirely, and, just below it, a wooden arm pivoted up with a neat mechanical shrug from the side of the pole. It was painted winter white and stenciled in black in an old font. "Proceed." It looked like something from a photograph in a museum, a semaphore gate, simple, with a half-moon of reflective tape at its end. The 2 pickups went forward without ceremony, the box truck behind them eased, and Jonah followed. He told himself without heat that the state must be refurbishing equipment. Temporary head failures happen. Older backups do what backups do. The wooden arm felt quaint, not spooky. The canyon took them and folded sound into itself. Inside the 1-lane section, the world compressed. Reflective tabs on fiberglass rods marched the edge where the guardrail gave up. The rock face on the left rose and stood, shoulders squared. A light powder lay in shelves on ledges overhead, a reminder rather than a threat. Jonah took his speed down a hair below posted and let the engine brake handle the weight lightly. The pickup's taillights were steady, and the box trucks next ahead of him kept a discipline that was, frankly, a relief. 500 yards in, he heard a small, crisp tap on the cab roof. Then another, then a scattering of gentle clicks that a person might mistake for a bird if night were a little easier on the mind. He thought of pebbles knocked loose by temperature shifts, of scant melt freezing again and cracking, of squirrels. He did what a driver does on narrow mountain roads. He let the sound pass through him and changed nothing about his inputs. The canyon road curved to the right, and then back to the left through a defile so narrow the sky braided itself in 3 shades at once. In the kink's belly, a turnout appeared, signed Maintenance Bay No Parking. An avalanche shed beyond it ran 40 yards. Concrete roof, rockfall screen draped like chainmail. Just past the far edge of the shed, something moved in Jonah's peripheral vision. Not fast, not showy. A glow, not electric, not headlight, more like the slow wag of an old lantern. A warm oval that swung once, twice, and then hung still. He feathered the brakes, not to stop, but to let the weight make up its own mind without being persuaded. The pickups ahead rolled on. The box truck eased as if the driver had seen the same swing of light. The glow held, centered over the far stripe for 3 heartbeats, and then fell, gone. A second later, a small shower of pebbles spilled from the top lip of the rock face beyond the shed, clattering across the lane, a sound no camera could capture, too faint, too layered. He was already slower than he would have been by 2 miles per hour, and that made all the difference. He had time to watch the stones bounce and spend their energy, time to let the truck roll out and over, time for the trailer to keep itself tidy. Not dramatic. Just a reason to be the man who had decided not to rush. The next bend took them to where the wall leaned back and seated a small handwidth of night to the right. The river far below made the sound cold water makes when told to go someplace narrower than it prefers. Jonah's hands were quiet on the wheel. He breathed like a man who's learned there is power in not holding air hostage. The red glow of the box truck's lights swam in a fine mist of blown powder, and then re-solidified as they exited the shed. The pebbles he'd seen were only that, pebbles. The rig took no harm. The canyon did its work and eventually widened. Ahead, the taillights of the pickup streaked briefly, then rose and were gone around a long corner where the gate must be. The box truck fell a little off and then picked up, a rhythm that made Jonah think of someone tallying breath. As the straight widened, the radio lifted a voice from a work channel he hadn't asked for. The canyon's walls throw radio like dice. It wasn't unheard of to catch a sliver of a conversation not meant for anyone beyond the crew. Bring 2 through, and hold the 3rd at the elbow, a woman's voice said, clear enough to be sitting at his shoulder, and not robotic. The tone exact and patient. Plow will stage on 12. Slide test reads low, but grit holds. Watch the ledge. Copy, said another voice, older, amused around the edges. Which elbow tonight? First one, she said. Lantern's enough. The radio fell back to hiss. The box truck ahead of him eased at the first elbow. They came to the canyon's tightest right-hander and paused just long enough to be called a pause. Jonah brought his rig to an almost stop, nose to the curves inside, hazard off, foot set, not crowding. For 2 seconds he felt the oddest certainty, like remembering a phone number someone used to call you from. He would be the 3rd, and the rule, though made elsewhere, was for him. A chain of faint tapping came again on the roof, the little dry music of grit shifting above, not announcing anything dramatic, just asking for civility. He waited, counted silently to 3, and then took the elbow. The truck cleared fine. It would have cleared anyway. He felt no burst of victory. He felt only the quiet of decisions that stack into the shape of safety. The gate at the far end showed its green plainly when they reached it. It perched on a pole newer than the one at the base, and its lens had the tidy, flat face of modern LEDs. Past it, northbound headlights stacked patiently, a short, silent line. Jonah rolled by the signal head and happened to glance up. The green winked, then died. The pole acquired the same wooden arm he'd seen at the base. It pivoted from its hinge with that genteel authority of things built to be final without being loud. Proceed, it read, to no one. Then both the arm and the LED face went still and blank, as if surprised to find themselves sharing a post. He looked again in his mirror and saw only ordinary little red eyes upstream and the shape of a snowcat far up the slope, pushing a drift into a behavior it had not owned. At the summit turnout, a plow waited with its blade lifted and its salt hopper covered. The driver sat in the cab with his hat pulled down, awake and not pressed. Jonah rolled by and lifted 2 fingers from the wheel. The plow driver answered without looking. A yellow light inside the cab glowed on a clipboard. The quiet language of people who work at night ran between them and went on. He descended easy. The pass opening onto wider country felt like bedtime pulling him along. The road out of the canyon grew more social, more signs, more small driveways, a lodge dark for the off-season. He kept to speed, let minutes flick by, stayed in the slow lane where it exists simply to give a driver something to keep company with. At the bottom, where the maintenance yard spread broad under a low roof and a high flag that snapped once and then remembered itself, he pulled in. He had no complaint to lodge, no story to tell, only a question to put into the world where it might be heard. He parked in the visitor area, set the brake, and walked in boots that knew the feel of this kind of concrete. Inside, a coffee pot kept a respectable heat on a warmer. A corkboard held maps printed on thick paper in blues and greens, hazard zones shaded in thoughtful grays. A man with a badge that read L. Trent sat at a desk reading a printout, as if he felt an affection for correct kerning. "Evening," Jonah said with that tone of the night that holds no edge. "Evening," the man answered, setting the page aside with a square movement. "If you're about to compliment the grid on 12, I'll take it." "I will," Jonah said, and found himself smiling because it was not the compliment he'd come in to give, but it felt true. "Also, your gate at the base did something old-fashioned." Wooden arm came up. Same on the far end. Trent's eyebrows lifted a little. "Wooden arm? Painted white," Jonah said. Word proceed on it. Looked like a museum piece that had ideas about retirement. Trent pivoted in his chair and glanced at a monitor showing a grid of small, slow camera feeds. The base gate appeared grainy at one of the corners, watching its own piece of night with bureaucratic calm. The lens wasn't kind in low light. "We swapped the heads to LED last summer," Trent said after a second. Old bulbs were eating budget and grumpy at cold. "We didn't mount any arms. Never had arms since the 80s. Used to be a manual gate at the bottom. My first winter here, we winched that thing up and down by hand when power cut. Got rid of it when we put the first electronics in." He looked, not bothered, just curious, like a man who loved his road and therefore did not mind when it showed him an angle he hadn't seen. "Counter? Show you a countdown?" "It did," Jonah said. "Then it didn't. Then the arm did the talking." Trent said. A sound that contained no detective work, just listening. "Ice can do interesting things to sensors. Old metal under the pole can hold odd current. We've got a generator on auto. The canyon's a bowl. Signals bounce. I've seen fog turn a streetlight into a sermon." Jonah nodded. He didn't require the man to believe him. He didn't require himself to believe anything beyond what his eyes had given. On the wall behind Trent, a framed photograph showed a crew in canvas coats next to a snow-choked alley of cut rock, a wooden arm across a lane, a man on a crank. The caption read, "Swallowtail Team, 1974. Keep the pass open." Someone in the photo had a grin that made you want to die with your boots on. "Either way," Jonah said. "Something put pebbles where I could see them. It made me keep a gentleman's speed." Trent's mouth did a small smile that felt earned. "I'll take a hand with that any time," he said. "We've been in this canyon a long time. It remembers people. People remember it. In a blow, I swear you can smell the coffee from bunkhouse 3 halfway down mile 6. No science, just noses and stories." Jonah poured a small coffee, not because he needed it, but because a cup between hands is sometimes a way of acknowledging a room. On a bulletin board near the microwave, a faded index card was pinned, edges furred by time. In pencil, in block letters, someone had written, "Wait if you wonder." The pencil line had been traced over so often in so many winters that it looked like a rule printed at birth. He forgot about the wooden arms for an hour, while the road took him into easier miles, and his head loosened its grip on the ridge. Then he thought of them again at a wide pullout where the stars had decided to be generous. He laughed once in the cab. a dry sound, because in the end the only story it left him with was the oldest one the highway knows. Be slower than your impatience, be quicker than your pride, and let the old habits of safety do their quiet work, whether or not you can name who is minding the gate. The dock took him at dawn, the stackers in their vests making neat games with pallets and the beep of a forklift an agreeable punctuation to a night spent among stone. He slept for an hour, and the dream that came was not a dream of arms or pebbles or semaphores. It was of a simple signal. Red that meant stop until you know why. Green that meant you have a moment, and something that wasn't a color at all, just a motion that said proceed, steady as you are. Weeks later, with winter getting ready to tell a different kind of truth, Jonah heard a voice over the CB as he came up the valley at dusk. Southbound. You got Swallowtail? Or you taking the long way? Someone asked. Swallowtail, he answered. Gates working? They work, came the reply. And when they don't, they work anyway. He smiled, not because he understood, but because understanding wasn't required. He rolled toward the canyon he knew well enough to respect and the gate he trusted enough to check. And when he came to the base, the red eye glowed with its modern correctness and the digital counter ticked down. When it expired, the green lit like a blessing. No arm appeared, he went on. Later, in a diner in a town that has one story per occupant and no more, he mentioned the arm to a man who wore the road maintenance logo on a sweatshirt that looked older than his kid asking for ketchup. The man said, "You ever see the blowdown scar on the west wall? Storm in '82 put half a hill where the road wanted to be. We cut a notch through that mess with a wood arm and a crank and a radio that played more static than it did human voices. We were young and too dumb to know we were cold. Sometimes the canyon gives you back a piece of what you taught it. I figure if something in there wants to wave a lantern or lift a board when the electronics take a nap, I won't argue." Jonah didn't argue either. He drove with the same hands he'd always used, paid respect to the small sounds on the roof, the way light moves on ice, the places where rock remembers you even if you don't remember rock. On certain nights, he felt the urge to wait when nobody had asked him to, and he did, and he was never sorry for the minutes. On other nights, the road was only a road, and he loved it for that too. If anyone asked him later whether the gate at Swallowtail grew an extra arm in winter, he would say, "Sometimes the mountain chooses old tools for new jobs." If anyone asked him whether he had seen a lantern swing, he would say, he had seen light move in a way that made his hands choose patience. Neither answer would be wrong, and none would require a listener to believe in anything but the decent idea that the road, which has kept so many people moving, occasionally keeps someone still just long enough for the night to reorganize itself into safe passage. Story number 8. The plains had the look they get when winter is pausing rather than finished fields, chalk white in the shallow places, and the higher knolls rubbed to the color of torn paper. Snow fences stood in ranks like patient audiences, brown slats threading the wind. The highway stretched level for a kind of distance that makes thoughts longer. Avery liked that. A night's worth of quiet between towns. A reefer humming steady behind. A sky with more stars than lamps. The forecast had said flurries, not trouble, and the last town's reader board at the co-op had given him his favorite kind of advice: windy drive with both hands. He had flour under the trailer pallets of it, stacked clean and wrapped, bound for a bakery's distribution hub. Weight that rode nice. Tires thrummed that ribbon sound that tells you everything is aligned. The CB sat low. He checked it every few miles the way a person checks a sleeping kid. Not to wake it, just to know it's still there. His phone had a signal so thin you could see daylight through it. He was fine with that. Somewhere east of the county line, a sign he hadn't noticed before flashed reflected in his headlights. Emergency phones. Every 2 miles. It said in a font that belonged to another era. A second sign followed. Use shooter only in extreme need. The yellow diamond below it depicted a truck bending in wind. He hadn't seen call boxes on this route in years. Maybe the sign hadn't been taken down yet when they took the phones away. The way things get edited in chunks out here. The wind had been behaving big hands moving over the roof, but not grabbing. Then, between 1 mile marker and the next, the world narrowed. Not falling snow exactly. More like the powder that had insistently loosened itself from fields and ditches, decided it belonged in the air again. Ground blizzard. A filmy, persuading white that didn't look like much until the lanes thinned to mere suggestion and the horizon folded itself into the hood. Avery eased down like he was clicking a lamp to a lower setting. He found the rumble strip with his right tire and kept it softly, like a blind man gliding a hand along a wall in a house he knows. Hazard lights stayed off on an open highway in this kind of whiteness. A stopped vehicle lit like a holiday can invite someone in behind you who thinks you're moving. He kept moving. 15 miles per hour is still moving. A line of snow fence to his right felt like a companion, the slats making a blurred ladder he could count. Once or twice the wind let him look past, and he could see the drift lines the fence had convinced to form. The night closed again. The reefer hummed. The steering wheel belonged under his hands, not too tight, not too loose. He was old enough at this to know that calm can be held like a candle. A little blue hexagon slid into sight on the right shoulder and out again, almost lost in the milk of air. He could have missed it if the reflective number hadn't flashed at the last second. Call box 146. The idea of a phone out here, on a night as thin as this, felt like something from a photograph. 0.2 of a mile later, he saw the post itself. A yellow pedestal standing as if shouldered out of the snow. Square door shut. A small solar panel on top, rimmed in rime. He didn't need a phone. He was moving. He was okay. Then the wind did one of the things it can do when it has an opinion. It sliced under the trailer and pushed hard. The steering answered like a careful horse. The lane marker vanished completely for the first time. His hands were steady. His jaw wasn't. He found himself picturing the next 3 minutes, and in each version something kept moving the lines. He sided with caution and with the idea of voices. He signaled without expecting anyone to see, breathed once in deliberate time, and coaxed the truck onto the shoulder by inches, reading the right side through texture more than sight. He eased to a stop, straight as a pencil on paper. Triangle kits are useless in this kind of air. The best courtesy is speed and stillness in balance. He set the brake, punched on the hazards now because the world had turned from river into room, pulled on gloves, took his beanie from the hook, and opened the door into a cold that had been sharpened to a tidy edge. The callbox door was stubborn in the way of doors that have been asked to winter in solitude, but came with a tug. Inside, a handset waited in a nest of gray plastic that had faded to the color of a pale cloud. A single metal button sat under a label, "Press for District Assistance." The label had been printed when printers made letters with the weight of ink. He pressed. A half second of nothing, then a click that sounded like paper being set down on a desk, and a voice arrived, even and careful, and exactly the right temperature. District 9 Highway Assistance. "Hello," he said, and then felt like a man knocking on someone's door after midnight. "Westbound on Carver Plains, call box at 146. Ground blizzard. I can move, but I'm not going to pretend I'm enjoying it." "Understood," the voice said. She sounded like someone who had taught young operators to thread needle and thread under pressure. "What are you running? Tractor? Trailer? Empty? Or loaded?" "Loaded. Flour. Guessing 70. Too gross. Blue tractor, white reefer. 2 lanes out here, straight run. No overpasses for a while." "Copy," she said. "Name? Avery." "Hi, Avery. I'm Agnes." She didn't add a title. She didn't sell him anything. He pictured a small room with a map on the wall and a ring-bound logbook open to tonight. "We've got a plow string just behind you, coming up from mile 144. They're staying off the main line until we know the crosswind on the wide part past 148 isn't going to shove them around. You have 2 choices. If you can hold 10 to 15 and stay right of the center, I can bring you to a maintenance cut just ahead and get you inside until the blow across the flats settles. If the idea of moving makes your shoulders climb, we can send a plow to back you into the cut. I prefer the first, keeps the plows free to tend where the drifts are building like fences." He glanced toward the vague place where the world existed. "I can move 10, he said. "I'd rather be in a place where I'm not guessing as hard." "Good," she said, and in the way she said it, he felt a small, humane approval that made his chest not so tight. "All right, here's the pattern. Take me with you. Door shut. Window cracked just enough for me to hear the world when you're quiet. Hazards off now. On only if you need to stop. Wheel straight. And if you lose the edge of the world, don't chase it. Let the rumble strip find you. In 10 seconds. Resume. I'll count you through 2 small corrections and a right-hand turn. That turn is real. It's our windbreak lane into Oak Draw shelter. He climbed back into the warmth and did what she asked. The voice in the handset settled into the cab, no strange reverb, no delay. He had her on speaker by pinching the handset under the dash light, safe and dumb as stone, facing the floor. The world outside was milk with a border. He eased off the brake, rolled, found the rumble strip, let it speak in small syllables. "Good," Agnes said, and he almost laughed because she was grading his driving the way a mother grades pie, gently. 20 seconds straight. Then the fence on your right will make a thicker line because the slats are closer for 100 yards. When that happens, count a slow 5 and feed the wheel a spoonful to the right. He rolled. The fence, when it appeared, did so exactly the way she'd said, the slats blurring into a more solid band, like an underline turned bold. He counted. He turned a spoonful. The shoulder widened a jolt in his wrist, the way a gravel cut feels under snow. "That's your lane," she said. "Not yet. Not yet. 5 more. Now. Now." He turned. The truck took the angle like a grateful thing. He felt the gravel under snow, the edge not steep, the lane narrow but not mean. The wind changed opinion as the snow fence and a low rise took it on their shoulders. He could see the brown side of a sand shed ahead, a dome like half an orange eaten by time, square doors closed, a single light above them drawing a small, respectable airport of moths, even in winter. "Stay in it," she said. "There's a slide door on your right, 3 feet off the ground from drift. I'm opening it. You'll hear chain." A clink came through the handset, not the telephone kind, but the physical. A chain moved where a chain stays. The right-hand door rose in a judder. Inside, a narrow bay waited, empty and swept. The world outside was a page being turned. He felt a flush of relief so acute it embarrassed him. He eased the rig in as if someone were beside him with a tape measure. "Park straight," Agnes said. "Leave yourself room in front. You'll have company." He set the brake. The door settled behind him with a kindness the wind nudged, then stopped. The shed smelled like salt, diesel, and the particular clean of sand piled dry. His own engine noise bounced off concrete in a way that felt like being inside a safe word. He turned the key to accessory. The reefer carried on doing its respectful job. "Agnes?" he said. He realized he said her name as if he had known it a long time. "You're a marvel. Just old and organized," she answered, and he could hear a smile, but not a smug one. "Western fence drifts trying to crawl across the main line. We're closing one lane till it falls down. You chose the better story." A minute later, a plow's amber lights wobbled against the inside of the big door and then cut as the machine tucked in outside. A second rig, a straight truck with a county logo, slid in nose first at the far end. Its driver face behind glass, reflective stripe blinking in the light, gave him a small wave. The kind of conspirators wave people exchange at 3 in the morning when they have decided to trust strangers in buildings. On the handset, he heard a second voice, distant, like it came through a different room. "Oak Draw secure," it said. 2 inside, counting the westbound reefer. 1 more at the box by 148. Spam calling me. "You want me to take it?" "Oh, I'll take it," Agnes said. "Next one gets the East Bay. 40 minutes and the wind turns lazy." They waited. There is a way that time stretches itself in a place made for waiting. He sat with hands idle and didn't look at his phone, just to be looking. He let his heart rate find a comfortable chair and sit down. He could hear the faint putter of a small heater somewhere behind the wall and the occasional rustle of sand shifting a fraction under its own weight the way stored grain does. The plow's driver outside shouted something to someone, and laughter came back, a sound that exists even when the outside is pressure and white. Another truck nosed into the East Bay 12 minutes later, a cattle pot with a tarped top and marker lights gone modest under the powder. The driver leaned out, beanie pulled low, and gave Avery an old-timey salute with 2 fingers. Avery returned it. The door rattled. The wind tested and then thought better. "Coffee's terrible if you make it in that office," Agnes said like someone sharing a family secret. "But it exists. There's a tin on the shelf. Use 2 scoops even if the bag says 1. He laughed before he could help himself. "You watch us on camera?" "Just phone boxes and radio and what my plow tells me," she said. "I like my crew too much to crowd them with lenses. You're in a bubble. Don't worry. If we lose power, the door is weight, biased. It'll open from the inside at a push. I try not to make cages. Avery imagined her, he couldn't help it. Voices make pictures. He saw someone who knew where the hole punches were without looking. He saw a sweater thrown over the back of a chair and a bulletin board with the edges of holidays pinned under a thumbtack. He saw a map with a smear of graphite at the places where the wind can take over. He knew he was likely wrong, and that nothing required him to be right. 35 minutes later, the wind softened as promised, not in a dramatic collapse, but like a room singing itself quieter. The powder shifted back to field and ditch, a bit at a time. The door lifted, letting in a slab of gray. Outside, the world had regained edges, the fence's shadow, the lip of the road. The plow rolled away, steady as a slow animal, spreading grit like a cook throws salt. Agnes came back in his ear with a tone like the next paragraph. You can go, Avery. Main line is right of Polite. West will stay low visibility for 3 more miles. Then the fence above Dead Mule Creek shields you better than church. After that, the skies decided to remember who it is. He eased out into the daylight that wasn't daylight and found the lane again. Slow, then less slow. A mile on, another call box stood where she said it would. He imagined it ringing faintly on the hook like a seashell remembering the ocean. He passed mile 149 and could feel the wind let its shoulders drop. He thought of the word agricola, which had come out of nowhere, remembered from a Latin class in high school the idea of fields and the people who work them, and how roads were lines they drew through that idea so bread could move. He smiled at his own head and let the truck roll a little more. At the next town, a low cluster of buildings canted against a rail line and a feed store with a bell. They had a little DOT outpost with a flag, and 2 plows parked in a tidy row, and a door with a glass pane whose edges had fogged. He didn't need anything. He turned in anyway. He wanted to, if such wanting counts. Inside, the woman at the desk had a white streak in her hair, the exact color of the sky at a certain point before snow. The nameplate said H. Lucero. She looked up and saw both Trucker and Thaw on his shoulders. You fellas okay out there? She asked, already making a small gesture toward a coffee pot that had in fact been told terrible lies by its maker. More than okay, he said. Whoever's minding the phones walked me into Oak Draw. Best 10 minutes I've had with a stranger in a while. Lucero tilted her head. Phones? She glanced at the map on her wall the way a person glances at a photograph of their kids. We shut those boxes down 5 years back. Kept the shells up for a bit for the pigeons. Now we're pulling them as we get budget and weather to agree. Agnes used to be our queen of the call boxes. She had a voice that could make a herd of panicked motorists into a chorus. She retired in. She consulted a framed photo on a shelf of a group standing in front of a snowcat. Oh, Mercy 2010? Lives in town. Keeps everyone's pies honest at the fair. Avery smiled without teeth. She answered tonight, he said. Gentle as an absurdity deserves. Maybe someone else uses her name. Lucero looked at him the way a person looks when she is doing 2 kinds of math. We've got a plow boss named AJ, who likes to sign things AJ Ness to be funny, she said. If he's the voice you heard, he's got a weirdly calming phone manner for a guy who can build a drift fence out of bad moods. Or, she shrugged without surrender, sometimes the radio and the old copper decide to be friends in a storm, and you get ghosts of programs we have no business hearing. Agnes used to staff the after-hours phone. We've cut it back. People call 911, and we get the call from dispatch. But on nights like last night, you'll hear things that were said a long time ago. I've heard the morning farm report from 1998, when all I had on was an empty scanner. He thanked her for the coffee he didn't drink. On his way out, his eye caught a small corkboard near the door, the kind with index cards pinned crookedly. Among them, an old, sun-faded safety flyer sat, corners curling. Old phones, new rules, it said. Underneath, in smaller letters, use if needed. If not, wave and go on. Someone had drawn a smiley face next to wave. On the next run west a week later, the air lay like glass over the fields. The call boxes had been removed from more of the posts. The emergency phone signs were gone. In sunlight, the sand shed doors looked ordinary, and a little dented. He passed Oakdraw anyway with a slow blink of gratitude. He imagined a pencil line, faint and careful, connecting his earlier night to that bay. He did not stop. On another night, late winter pretending not to be spring, he heard the handset on his CB Fizz, and then speak in a voice he knew from somewhere other than hearing. For the rig westbound near 150. 3. If you're straining your eyes, let them rest and drop a gear. There's no prize for being first to the next windbreak, Agnes said, or someone did, and then the air returned to its usual night music. He slowed because it was a good idea regardless of who had suggested it. Nothing happened because sometimes the smaller story is the entire story. He was fine. Months later, loading in a town the size of a sentence, he met a woman buying coffee at a counter where the clerk had hung a string of paper snowflakes left over from the holidays. She had the kind face that helps other people talk. On her jacket, someone had stitched Agnes in tidy block letters above a patch that said volunteer. He asked her if she had worked the phones once upon a time before he knew he was going to ask. She said yes, as if he had asked if she'd once owned a certain dog. He told her a slender version of his night at Oakdraw. She listened with the care of someone who likes stories and is not greedy for them. I still sit some nights, she said. We don't have the boxes, but we have people who forget they can just stay put a minute and breathe. I like reminding them breathing never hurt anybody. And the phones, she smiled without being a nuisance. Those old boxes knew more about who we were than we knew about them. Copper remembers voices. My husband always said that. He fixed lines for the phone company when poles still had iron steps. Thank you, he said, because it was the right-sized phrase. Good, she answered softly, in exactly the same cadence she had used in the shed. Be safe, Avery. He didn't ask how she knew his name. She had a jacket that said volunteer. She could have overheard something in a dispatch room once. He could have told her without remembering he had. The world supplies plausible rivets for the span you're building if you want them. He took what was offered. A night when a voice had made the space between miles manageable and a building had opened because someone remembered what it was for. He drove on into spring. The snow fences waited for next year. The sand sheds held their pyramids under tarps. The wind forgot who it had been for a while and became a mild way to communicate between fields. Sometimes, when the road shook just wrong and the shoulder story got a little loud, he would hear, under everything else, the particular click of a phone connecting two places. It might have been his memory practicing. It might have been a real sound slipped loose and reused by the night. The highway is full of devices, signs, apps, radios inside radios. Once in a while, an older thing with a simpler job picks itself up and does that job again because the need is still there. The call boxes had been painted yellow, so you could find them when everything else was gray. He had found one. A voice had filled a small, cold space with instructions that were instructions only because they were kindness. The rest, the drift and the wind and the way time offered itself differently for 40 minutes he left unpinned. If asked later whether he believed a decommissioned phone got him to a safe bay, he would say, he pressed a button, and a human voice told him how to place his tires in the world for a little while. He did it. He got where he was going. And in the cab, as the plane stretched again into more ordinary night, he carried that voice like drivers carry everything they set it on the dash where talismans aren't supposed to sit. And they watch the road, and they let good happen to them without insisting on cataloging why. As the last engine hum fades into the night, remember, some stories don't end when the headlights go dark. Out there, on forgotten stretches of asphalt, something still waits, patient, unseen, and closer than you think. If you've made it this far, you're part of the few who dare to travel these haunted miles. Like this video, share your own chilling road tale in the comments, and subscribe to The Sleep Haunt, where the darkness never truly ends. Sleep well, if you can.